G'day mate, Luke Ford here. I love this theme of how do we bring souls out of hiding. I want to continue on with that theme, and one technique that worked for me was learning the Alexander technique. Let me play a video. Experience with the Alexander technique.
Alexander technique lesson. The Alexander technique is about learning how to move the way the body likes to move. In an Alexander technique lesson, you'll learn to notice how you respond to stimuli, how you can let go of those responses that do not serve you. Take the startle response, for instance, where there's a loud noise that suddenly goes off and your head juts forward and your shoulders rise up. Then you let go of those, tilts back onto your neck, compressing your spine. You go through life with this weird tension pattern where the right shoulder is higher than the left, or your brow's always furrowed because you're thinking about such deep, lofty issues. Think Jimmy Carter or George W. Bush. On the other hand, you have smooth, elegant politicians such as Barack Obama and Ronald Reagan, who have much greater command of themselves. They're much more at ease with themselves, and therefore it's much easier to listen to them. When you can learn to let go of these interfering tension patterns, you're more likely to be at ease with yourself, and you're more likely to be at ease with other people. It's a great way to grow personally, psychologically, spiritually, and to achieve a higher level of performance athletically or with music or with acting. If you can notice what your responses are to stimulus and what your responses are to your mother or to your boss, and you can let go of those responses that don't serve you, because almost all of the patterns, the kinesthetic habits that we pick up as we go through life, almost all of them set us back. They don't serve us. So when we can get rid of these harmful tension patterns, when we can let go of our unnecessary responses to stimuli by compressing and pulling down on ourselves, we just kind of rise up into life. We become more buoyant, we become more happy, we're better able to relate to ourselves, we're better able to relate to other people.
Okay, so I discovered the Alexander technique in 2008, eventually trained to become a teacher. It was a 3-year process, similar to law school. 3 years, 36 weeks a year. And it's all about locating those interfering tension patterns, muscular holding patterns that really do not serve us. So here's an interview with the Alexander technique teacher, Constance Newman.
Great. Okay. Like many people, I came to the Alexander technique as a performer and as someone in pain. I had chronic lower back problems, sciatica, and diagnosed with various things. And I was still young and still determined, and I would just kind of push through the pain and go to many dance classes and many rehearsals, and just do as much as I can with dealing with the pain as little as possible. I joined Ann Bleethenthal and Dancers, which is now a 25-year company. Ann Bleethenthal is the artistic director, and she's an Alexander technique teacher also here in the Bay Area. And her choreography, I think, is influenced quite a lot by the ideas of Alexander. So dancing for her, and coming from a ballet background, I had certain patterns and habits that were particular to ballet, and perhaps not the greatest training in ballet. And I had difficulty expressing her choreography, her modern and much freer, open, and less held choreography. So she suggested that I take lessons, and I did. I actually took lessons with another Alexander technique teacher so as to keep the dance and the Alexander relationships separate. And
so let me show you a little bit about what the Alexander technique lesson looks like with one teacher that I had, Larry White. So here we go.
Okay, great. I was over here in Larry's corner.
This is from about 2011.
So I'm here with Larry White, my favorite Alexander technique teacher. And Larry's been a teacher for 35 years?
35, yeah.
When did you graduate from Patrick?
It was a little
McDonald
heavier
School?
then.
1976.
Okay. So what caused you to develop an interest in Alexander Technique?
What caused me? Cheers. A book.
Which one?
Edward Maisel's Resurrection of the Body.
And what was it about that book?
Came out in 1969, I think, first edition. There are 3 quotes on the cover. One, and I don't remember the exact quotes themselves, but one was by John Dewey. And I knew who John Dewey was, but I didn't know that much about him. The other was by Aldous Huxley, whom I've been interested in. I've read quite a few of his novels and other books. And the other was by George Bernard Shaw, who I've also been very interested in. Read quite a few of his plays. And I'm just curious why I didn't know who this Alexander guy was.
How much of the book was about Alexander Technique?
The whole.
Oh, okay.
It's actually just a compilation of selections from his writings.
And did it make sense to you when you read it?
Some of it did. Some of it was very fascinating. But in particular, the argument that we might be doing something that was causing our problems, doing something ourselves that was causing our problems. Of course, the book, I read through the book, and at the time I was working in the UCLA libraries. So I went up and saw what they had there and got all of the Alexander's books and read them too. And the one problem I had, I still didn't know what they were talking about.
Right. So what year is this?
This would be probably 1970. I think late 69 or 1970. And so I read the books. And it really interested me. I was really fascinated by what he was talking about because I didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And so when I read the books again, waited a while and read them again, and never really knew, again, didn't know what he was talking about. I did get in and read and follow up on all the references in the back, going to the articles since I was in the university library by Frank Pierce Jones, tracked them down, and then the other references they had in there. And then after a while, I'd go to a certain degree and then sort of let it lie for a while, but then I'd come back to it. It's interesting.
And were there a lot of Alexander teachers around Los Angeles at the time?
I never thought to look.
So how did you find a teacher?
It never occurred to me to look for an Alexander because it was something this old guy died back in the 50s.
Right.
In London. And well, I wondered, because a lot of it comes down to library stuff. UCLA library systems on the Library of Congress catalog system, the numbers. And then some of the books that I was tracking down, one was called, I think, Inhibition and Direction, or Inhibition and something. It was the last book I was trying to find of the stuff I'd gotten out of the Maisel book, last footnote. And I couldn't find it. Never did find it. But it was over in the DF section, which was mostly psychology and well, then it gets over very quickly into a little bit into religion. And I came across a book by Alan Watts.
Oh, right.
On Zen. This is on Zen. And I read it, and a lot of that sounded very interesting. It's much like, certain aspects of it sounded a lot like what Alexander was talking about. So I started reading it, and then I was reading other Eastern philosophies and going on like that. And this went on for over a period of about 3 years, I guess it was, 69, 70. about 72, Alan Watts came to town to give a lecture, put on by a group called Kairos. Greek word, what it meant. I don't remember what it meant. I went and heard him talk.
So I think the Dalai Lama refers to the Alexander technique as mindfulness for Westerners. So my definition of the Alexander technique is that it's a way of noticing how we do what we do, and to then let go of doing the things that do not serve us. So this is a video made in 2011, I think.
G'day, mate. So a lot of my students ask me, well, what should I do when I go to bed? How can I use Alexander technique when I sleep? And Alexander technique is about conscious awareness of your habits during your waking hours. So I have to be aware of your habits when you're asleep. So I've always said, no, there's nothing really you can do when you're sleeping. That's Alexander technique. I guess you could do active rest. It's not ideal. I think it's better to do it on a hard surface, but you can lie with a little support under your head. So I've always needed 2 pillows as far back as I remember. And most people seem just need 1 pillow under their head at night. Some people even sleep without any pillows. You can lie here during active rest, so your knees are up, lying on your back. Hands can rest on your sides or on your stomach. About your neck being free, the head is just supported so that it's not tipping back, nor is it tipping down. You don't want it like this, and you don't want it like this. You just want the head comfortably supported, and think about letting your forehead melt, your face melt, let go of all unnecessary tension. Neck is free, head releasing away from the torso. Think about the back lengthening to widen, directing from the hips to the knees, the ankles to the knees. Think about your shoulders widening. Think about your jaw being free. So one way you can do that is by saying the word Boston, Boston, Boston. See where that leaves your lower jaw. That's probably the optimal rest position for your lower jaw. Many people clench their jaws and have all sorts of TMJ problems. So if you can learn to release your jaw from unnecessary holding and tension, just let the weight of your jaw carry it down. Now, I've noticed that many female teachers in particular advise about use of pillows. So I've got this duvet, gives my knees a little support when I sleep. Then some people use a pillow between their legs. They rest, or a pillow under their upper arm here. I'm pretty good right here. But those are some options. Now, if you're a stomach sleeper, and I think generally speaking, Alexander teachers aren't real thrilled with stomach sleeping because it makes the breath more difficult. But if you are a stomach sleeper, then you want to do without any pillows. Just maybe you'll turn one knee out if you're a stomach sleeper. And I like to have just the optimal support under my head, so that's why I've added a towel just give me like an extra centimeter or so of support under my head. And I just love a duvet, so comforting. That has nothing to do with Alexander Technique. So I tend to sleep on my left side about 75% of the time. When I sleep on my back, it's when my sleep apnea is at its worst. So that's why I use a CPAP. But it's good to do active rest, particularly on a hard floor. Want to use usually a carpeted floor or a yoga mat, something so that you're not cold or uncomfortable when you're doing active rest, but you can do it in bed like this. A few whispered ahs. You think of something funny, whispered ah starts with the exhale. Think of something funny. The lower jaw to release down and away. And you don't suck the air in, you allow the air to come in.
Pretty stimulating stuff, wouldn't you agree?
So, how should you sit in a chair? What's the ideal chair? What's the ideal way to sit in a chair? Well, there's no ideal chair. There's no ideal way to sit in a chair. There are better and worse ways, but sitting in a chair is basically as unhealthy as smoking if you do it a lot. And after more than about 10 minutes, it starts having a deleterious effect on you. But there are worse ways you can sit. So one of the most common problems I see, people kind of sit on their tailbone. There's no comfortable way to sit in the chair. What happens is people slump, and then they push themselves forward for a while, and then they go back to slumping, sitting on their tailbone. So sitting on your tailbone in particular is a really bad way to sit in the chair. And the other thing I see is this, kind of the head tipping back, neck compressing, shoulders kind of hunch. So people both hunching forward and tipping the head back. Another really common thing I see is this hump. So what is it? Oh yeah. So notice how the general direction of my spine is going this way, but then right about here, my head tilts forward. So you want the head neck back to be in relationship, to be connected. So this is a good way to sit, directing from the tail of the spine to the top of the head. This is, if you're going to sit like this, sit like this. Funny thing about back support, if you use back support, your back gets weaker, and sitting without back support becomes more painful and more of a strain. So it's a vicious cycle. I'm getting this from Galen Krenz's book on the chair. And so what is probably 100% better than sitting in a chair is sitting in a stool. So here's my trusty stool. So it forces you to use yourself a little better, directing up, thinking about your width across your chest and across your back. Freeing the neck so the head can release forward and up. So I sit here typing away on a keyboard or driving. But yeah, sitting in a stool, much better than sitting in a chair. So don't tip the head back, then carry the head jutted forward. Allow the neck to be free, the head gently releasing away from the torso. Think about the legs gently releasing away from the torso as well, and directing to the knees, from the hips to the knees, the ankles to the knees, directing across the back and across the chest, directing from the tailbone to the top of your head, so you're getting length, thinking about width, letting go of needless compression. So when I read, I tend to read books like this. So I've got lots of support, so otherwise you're straining unnecessarily. So if I didn't have these pillows, be like this, try and be like this, but then I've got to hold the book up. That can be a weight, can be a hassle, so I like to stack a few pillows down, makes everything easier. And get up. So one of my Alexander Technique teachers is Michael Frederick, and though he is primarily an Alexander Technique teacher, he's also certified as an instructor in the Feldenkrais method. And I heard him interviewed the other day on a podcast by fellow Alexander teacher Robert Rickover. Michael made the point Alexander Technique basically works from the inside out, while Feldenkrais essentially works from the outside in. So Alexander is the older discipline. He was born out of the performing arts by an actor who lost his voice. So Feldenkrais started in the 1940s when Moshe Feldenkrais hurt his knee doing judo. He was told that he needed an operation. He declined the operation and looked to see if he could help himself. So Alexander Technique is a subtraction of habit patterns in the way we think, feel, and move. So what then is left over is good functioning. So Alexander Technique is more about undoing and non-doing. So Feldenkrais is more of a subtle doing, where the Feldenkrais practitioner guides a person through movement patterns. So Alexander Technique is all about, in the present moment, figuring out what is it that I do not need to do. Alexander Technique isn't so much about being smart in what you do, it's about being smart in what you do not do. So Feldenkrais has many advantages to people who are not able to mobilize their thinking process at the beginning. It's brilliant physical therapy. Alexander Technique is about learning to observe the inner program of me.
Okay, so that was a video from July of 2011, and I think this is a video from the end of 2011.
So I work a lot with my students using the stool as a stimulus and just see what happens as they stand up and sit down, because with the stimulus of folding and unfolding your limbs, usually the head will start tipping back onto the neck, onto the spine, and compressing the spine. So I see most students are kind of like this. Notice the head tipping back and the shoulders either hunching or riding high, and the back compresses. So the reason this is important is that there are more joints in the neck than anywhere else in the body, and a joint means a bone connecting with a bone. So if the neck is tight or compressed, then that's going to send layers of compression and tightness and unnecessary tension throughout the body. So if the neck is tight or compressed, the body cannot be free. So that's why I work a lot with my students, have them allow the neck to be free, and to teach them just make a decision as you stand up and sit down to not tip your head back. So it's hard to teach yourself Alexander Technique, but obviously FM Alexander, the developer of the Alexander Technique, was able to teach himself. So it can be done. And one of the things that I'd advise is just keep a hand on the back of your neck. Notice what happens when you engage in any activity, particularly challenging activity like getting in and out of a chair. See if the head starts to tip back and compress. See if the neck starts to tighten. And a variation on this is to keep one hand on the back of your head, one hand on your lower back, and see if the distance between your hands shortens, compresses while you're getting in and out of a chair. So the getting in and out of the chair has no meaning. What does have meaning is getting in and out of a chair, using that as a stimulus, and just seeing what your reaction is to that stimulus, because most people react to a strong stimuli by compression, by layers of unnecessary tension and tightness. So what's important is that even as you're going down in space, you're still lengthening and widening. So fundamental Alexander directions are the neck is free, so the head can release forward and up, and so you're directing your head basically in this direction,
because our tendency for most of us is to tip the head back and down. So we have the direction of thinking the head forward and up. So whatever you're doing, you're thinking the head forward and up. So if I'm coming down here to the floor, I'm still thinking about my head releasing it away from my torso. So forward and up, basically, when I'm down here, picking something off the floor, is my head's going towards the floor. If I didn't think those directions, what would naturally happen for me and for most people is that the head will tip back like this, and the whole back will compress. But you don't want that. You want to think the head away from the torso. So picking something off the floor, still directing the head away from the torso. This direction is just a gentle wish for the head to release away from the torso. It's not a push. It's not primarily a doing, because you'll notice when you try to do this direction, that will cause you to tighten and actually compress, which is the opposite of what we want. So it's just a gentle wish for the head to be released away from the torso and for the neck to be free. So whatever I'm doing, coming down into a squat, bending over, reaching out, I just have this gentle wish for my head to release away from my torso. So as I come here, pick something off my desk, still having that gentle wish for my head to release away from the torso. This is the fundamental direction that we wish for the head to release away from the torso instead of tipping back and down, compressing the torso, compressing the spine, making everything smaller and tighter. Instead we have this gentle wish to go up, flowing up through the torso, thinking about the back, widening and lengthening. So you can practice this on your own. Sit in a chair, put a hand on your neck. Just find out what happens. Notice.
Okay, another video.
So I was listening to this fun
2011
podcast by Alexander Technique teacher Robert Rickover. He was interviewing another Alexander Technique teacher, this one in the San Francisco Bay Area, Constance Claire Newman. And the primary topic was about the ways Alexander Technique can enhance your sex life. So Constance Claire Newman has this interesting life. She got her BA in English literature, then trained for 3 years to teach Alexander Technique. And during those 3 years, her day job was working as a book buyer at Good Vibrations, which was a sex store started in the 1970s by a feminist. And Constance says at that time we were very politically correct. We chose erotica we thought was happy and wholesome and generative of good in the world, rather than anything that might be shaming or racist or misogynist. Now things have shifted a bit. In the world of erotica, there's been a shift. People understand that sometimes fantasies can be those nasty, bad things, and that does not mean the person is going to be nasty and bad. So Constance said that in the course of the 3 years of Alexander Technique teacher training, every part of your life, all of your habits and patterns and behaviors and thoughts, and every part of our character is explored. And we were having discussions with each other about how our use of our whole self was changing and how that impacted our sexuality. And as you become more aware of yourself through Alexander lessons, you become less tense, less held, and you become more aware of sensations throughout the whole self. Because when muscles are tight like this, they feel much less. So as you start to undo, you may become aware of new sensations during sex. So tensing and contracting is what we humans do when something startles us or when we have anxiety or fear. It's an instinctual response. Also, when we're coming closer to orgasm, the contractions we have coming towards orgasm, we can tighten our whole body. That might create an orgasm faster. But it's also interesting to explore the opposite, and undoing is when it's coming towards arousal, one consciously undoes the tightness of the whole body. Now, you eventually want those delightful contractions that come with orgasms, but as you're going towards that, you can become more sensate, more experience the sensations throughout your whole body as you release and not contract as much, because tight muscles do not feel. Free muscles have the sensation, the skin, the touch, the quality of sensation is much more than the muscles are free. And this ability to release the contraction subconsciously is something that someone with Alexander lessons learns to do. So after giving an unsuccessful introductory lesson to the Alexander technique the other day, I started talking to a veteran Alexander teacher. I complained to him that I was unable to teach direction. Direction is one of the three fundamentals of the Alexander technique. There's observation, just noticing what you're doing. There's inhibition, which is stopping doing things that are hurting you. There's direction, where you give yourself directions. So the easiest way for me to teach you right now what direction is to show the opposite. So when I forget about my directions, I just kind of slump. Like this, see? And when I think my directions, so the neck is free, head's releasing forward and up, back lengthening to widen, and I come up and take my full height, my full width, my full length, my full space in the world. So direction is primarily thoughts, but it does then profoundly affect the musculature of the spine and the muscles. But you don't do it. You don't just primarily push up, but you think up. So, a little confusing. Well, this veteran teacher told me, look, many veteran Alexander teachers don't understand direction. So why, Luke, do you expect a newcomer to grasp it? And I said, well, how do you wake up a person's kinesthesia? And he suggested that I have the student pay attention to the sounds around him. So I've really started to do that and started doing that with myself. And have you heard the expression, and his ears perked up, or her ears perked up? So when you start listening for all the sounds around you, not just your ears perk up, but your whole kinesthesia perks up. You start to take your full space in the world just naturally without worrying about observation, inhibition, direction, just listening for every sound, and you'll just come up. It's like, whoop! It's amazing. So to me, I think this is the secret to the Alexander technique. Just let your senses come alive, particularly your sense of sound. That one works the most effectively and the most easily for me. But there's also the sense of touch. So you can just notice the feeling of your feet as they make contact with the floor. Or you can notice everything in your field of vision. So for me right now, to be able to see the right wall and the left wall simultaneously while I speak to you and notice everything in between. So just kind of soft eyes taking in the world around me. That will also serve to wake up my kinesthesia and help me to take up my full space in the world. But the easiest one, I think, is just listening. Just listen for every different sound. And as you listen, you'll perk up. Then you'll forget to listen, you'll start thinking, then come back to it and let your awareness be like a gentle background hum as you go about your day. Just be aware of the sounds around you, take in everything you see in the world in front of you, feel the floor under your feet.
Okay, so that was a video I made back in 2011. Yeah, my voice sounds a lot more strangled back then. It was very much in a monotone, so thank God for the voice lessons I had a few months ago. Anyway, the Alexander technique is an excellent way to release unnecessary tension patterns and to come out of hiding. So this is Constance Claire Newman speaking to Robert Rickover. He is the son of Admiral Chaim Rickover, the founder of America's nuclear navy. Robert Rickover is an Alexander technique teacher.
During this time, I learned that I could really change the way that I moved in my dance by thinking very specifically, as we do in our lessons. And I also got tools for dealing with the pain. So during with this time, I also realized that the way that I was being in the world, which was very what we call type A, very rushing around and very kind of pushing through everything and always fighting with myself somehow to get things right and do it right. And also, as a dancer, having many different part-time jobs, and I was going to school at the same time and was feeling very stressed pretty much all of the time. That was just my norm. So very stressed, still dealing with some amount of pain, and using my new way of moving in dance. So when I finished a BA in literature, I decided I really wanted to stay in movement, that was my that was how I could imagine being in the world and working. So I went into the Alexander training.
And that's training to become a teacher of the Alexander
Training to
Technique.
become a teacher, yes, yes. And I did my training with Frank Ottewell in San Francisco. And during those 3 years, my day job was working at Good Vibrations. Good Vibrations is a sort of clean, well-lighted sex toy and sex book and sex video store. It was started in the 70s by a feminist, Joni Blank, and she had the idea that she would have a store that was for all women who didn't want to necessarily go to some of the adult stores that were available then. And her whole philosophy was that she wanted women to feel comfortable, and she wanted women to get accurate information about sexuality. And she wanted women to not feel judged or shamed or pressured in any way. So the way that Good Vibrations runs is that all the staff are go through a training, a sex education training. And so as the book buyer, I not only had a sex education training, but I also had many, many opportunities to read very much about all different kinds of sexuality, and some, very inaccurate and sort of dreadful, and some wonderful. And so, as the person who was making that decision, what we would carry, I learned a lot in the 3 years, perhaps more than I even wanted to. No, I liked the learning process. Some of the erotica, at that time, we were very politically correct as well. So we chose erotica that we felt was kind of happy and wholesome and and generative of good in the world, rather than anything that might be shaming or racist or misogynist. And now I think it has shifted a little bit. I don't work for Good Vibrations anymore, but I would say in the world of erotica, there has been a shift in that people understand that sometimes fantasies can be some of those nasty bad things, and that doesn't mean the person is going to be. So there's a shift in, I think, how people see erotica these days. So, and the other thing, the other reason that I come to sexuality and sex education is my partner is the owner of Cleus Press. And Cleus Press has been publishing sex books and erotica and guides, sexuality guides, very good, very accurate ones for also 25 years. So I have a lot of conversations with her about this, and she's also the author of the whole lesbian sex book. So there's a lot of discussion in our house, very freely and very open and easy. Also, Felice is a somatic coach who works with people and couples around sexuality. So our house is a very open kind of place about sex.
Right. And so when did you start making the connection between what you'd learned with the Alexander Technique and sexuality?
I think that was in my training. I don't think that I made the connection before, although I might have just a little bit here and there. But in your Alexander training, it's a 3-year course, and really every part of your life, all of the habits and patterns that and behaviors and thoughts and every part of our character really is explored. And at least in our training it was. And I think that we even had discussions about how our use of our whole being was changing and how that impacted our sexuality. I know that we had discussions how it might possibly impact an affair with an Alexander teacher. And although I've never actually had sex with an Alexander teacher, I've certainly thought about how it might be different in the kind of quality of being that that we are working towards embodying.
Right, right. Well, if I could just interject for a second here.
Yeah.
I trained in London in the late 70s, and we never talked about sex in the Alexander technique in the training course. But it did happen one day, kind of by accident, that the 3 or maybe there were 4 male members of my class happened to be having tea together after class one day, and the subject came up, and we all agreed that that was one of the most profound influences, and yet it had never, and we'd all had pretty similar experiences. And
really,
yeah, and we were all amazed to discover that we all had the same had benefited in that area in the same way, but yet it had never come up in classes. Sort of
right.
Ironic, but that was London in the 30 years ago, and when you were training, that was San Francisco, 15 years ago?
Yes.
There's a world of difference. But
yes.
Anyway, so I think it might be good at this point for someone who's intrigued by this connection to say a little more specifically how Alexander technique lessons could actually help someone enhance their sexuality and their sex lives.
Yes. So I think most of us then, including your experience in London, are experiencing the benefits or the greater pleasure indirectly. So as we change our use of ourself from lessons, we become less tense, less held. We become more aware of sensations through the whole self. And so as we are each individually on our own Alexander journey, really, we might become aware of these sort of undoings or allowings or new sensations during sex.
And just to interrupt for a second, that phrase you used, the use of ourselves, that might not make too much sense to someone who's not in the Alexander world. Could you just say a sentence or two about what you mean by that?
Yes, the use of ourselves is how we go about all of our daily activities, how we use our bodies and the connection with the body and the mind in our life. So the self is not just the body, the self is not just the mind, the self is the whole integrated organism, so to speak.
And it might be useful to say here that this concept of use, spelled U-S-E, that Alexander came up with was a pretty interesting idea that hadn't really been thought about before, in that he came to realize, and I think anyone who has any Alexander technique experience comes to realize, that there are certain patterns of posture and movement that we tend to carry over into a huge range of activities. Right. So it's not about how you do a particular activity, but how you do everything. And I think one of Alexander, this is the guy who developed the Alexander technique, F. Matthias Alexander, I think one of his big discoveries really was that there's a commonality that cuts across various activities.
That's right.
Anyway, I just wanted to clarify that for our audience. Anyway,
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, we have a little bit of jargon, just like many many fields.
The Alexander technique does have a bit of jargon, not a whole lot, but some, and it's pretty important to explain, I think, those terminology to people.
That's
Anyway,
right.
so you were saying?
So I would say that that indirectly, many students of the Alexander technique would come to these kind of thoughts or explorations by themselves without any direct communication about it with their teacher or their training course, or unless they were so like you said, like friends or like trainees in a course.
So I think we should get back to or get on to the topic really of how specifically lessons in the Alexander technique would help someone with sexuality.
Yes, and I think that there is a overall change of one's use of the self that influences every area of one's life, including sexuality. And in my experience with my students, I would say, in general, whatever changes they're experiencing, they don't come to me about sex. Occasionally, I have had students speak to me about their experiences, and it's always been really delightful and positive conversation. And it's never been very specific. So that is, I've never had a student come to me and say, well, hey, Constance, while I was having an orgasm last night, what I really noticed was that I wasn't tensing, my thighs as much, and therefore, da-da-da-da-da. So, but they would bring it up in the context of how great their relationship was going or something like that. However, as a sex educator and as someone who feels relatively easy talking about sex, I think that they might bring it up more with me, and especially if they know that part of my life. And then because I'm easy to talk to about it, perhaps I have more conversations than the average Alexander technique teacher would with their student about sex. I would never bring it up myself as a topic to work with in lessons. I would always wait for the student to broach that subject. That said, if somebody is broaching the subject, I will talk about the different ways that the Alexander technique and the work that we're doing in changing the use of ourself or refining, getting an easier relationship to one's own body, to one's own emotional self, to the world, really, and of course to one's partners or relationships, all relationships, really. So one of the ways that I see that happening, aside from this very indirect kind of ease that we are going toward, is in the specific concept of tension and contraction that we humans do whenever there's something that startles us or whenever we have anxiety or fear. And it's also an instinctive response as we're coming toward orgasm. So the contractions, which create an orgasm, one can have one can tighten one's whole body and sort of very as tight, and tight and contracted, and that kind of sometimes helps or creates an orgasm perhaps faster or more or something is people's experience. But it's very interesting to explore the opposite. So to explore an undoing. So as one is coming towards arousal and going through the whole process, one consciously undoes those the tightness of the whole body. Not that you don't want to eventually have those contractions that are the delightful orgasm itself, but that as you're going towards that, there's a possibility of being more more sensate, that is experiencing the sensations really throughout the body, as you are releasing and not contracting as much. So tight muscles don't feel, right? But freer muscles have somehow the sensation, the skin, the touch, the quality of sensation is more when the muscles are freer.
And that ability to release some of the contraction consciously,
yes,
that's something that someone who takes Alexander lessons would be probably a lot better able to do than without the lessons. And
well, that is one of the things that we are learning in lessons, is a conscious undoing of tension.
Right.
And usually we're starting with the head neck and the balance of the head neck.
Right.
And often we go to breath, and then we are thinking about it, this releasing throughout the entire body, and we're applying it in different activities. So as I play my violin, I think about releasing through my arms, right? As well as other places, of course. But we are getting very specific about how each of us can come to this undoing of tension and contraction in our various the things that we do in our life.
And that's going to be different than someone just saying to themselves, I'd like to be a little more relaxed.
Definitely.
And because because in fact, you in a way, I guess you could say, you need a kind of a specific methodology to do that effectively.
Yes, and I think that the grounding of this idea, where we begin with the head-neck relationship, the joint at the head-neck, not contracting down, not compressing the head. It's sort of this 101. So this is the beginning where we start, but we might go to the ankles being free, and then to the breath being free, and then there's, one is encompassing the whole self and including the habits or the emotional reactions as well. So as we in Alexander lessons become more skilled at undoing and releasing, I think that kind of overflows to different areas. But it's definitely a skill, this awareness, and I often use the term proprioception in lessons, the sense within. So it's not just the kinesthetic sense, how we are moving around in space, but what's going on internally, and how you can actually influence with your intention the internal sensations and changes.
And that ability to use your intention in an effective way, that is exactly what Alexander teachers teach people to do.
That's the crux of what we do. Yes.
Now, it seems to me that another way in which there might be a connection is, let's take someone who comes to lessons because they have back pain, which is a pretty common reason, actually, for people
Certainly
taking
is.
lessons. Now, if you have back pain, that is going to very likely interfere with your sexuality, just in terms of the mechanics, right?
So I'll talk a little bit about how I came to the Alexander technique. And it came from a book by Neil Strauss called The Rules of the Game, which turned out to be actually two little books: The Style Life Challenge, Master the Game in 30 Days, and The Style Diaries, The Pickup Artist Companion. So this is 2008. On page 28 of the Style Life Challenge, Neil Strauss writes, because posture is key, not just to your confidence and appearance, but also to your health. I've prepared an extra credit video tutorial for you online at Style Life Challenge. It provides the basics on Alexander technique, a school of movement that improves not just the way you stand, walk, and sit, but also the way you speak and feel about yourself. So I was in a kind of desperate place in life at the time. And just that sentence, that it's a school of movement that improves not just the way you stand, walk, and sit, but also the way you speak and feel about yourself. And I thought, oh, this sounds awesome. And the woman who did the video on Neil Strauss's website, Julia, I chose her to be my first Alexander Technique teacher. I took about 30 lessons with her beginning in July of 2008. And I was so impressed by it that I then decided to train to become an Alexander Technique teacher. So let me play from an interview with a dentist of more than 3 decades who trained to become an Alexander Technique teacher.
And at some point, I assume you encountered the Alexander Technique and at some later point decided to train to become a teacher. And how did that come about?
Well, actually, I came to Alexander Technique teaching training kind of indirectly. I had a practice where I had a specialty practice of endodontics, and people would be sent to me for differential diagnosis by other dentists and by physicians, and these people would have the request that I rule out the possibility that pain of the pulp, which is the blood vessels and nerves inside the teeth, might be causing either chronic or acute pain that these patients were suffering. And I could do that very efficiently. If it was indeed the pain coming from inside the tooth, I could treat that effectively. And if it wasn't, most times the patients would be quite grateful not to have root canal treatment and go off happily, but I would be left wondering, what is this pain from? Why? Although I knew it wasn't from inside the tooth, they were still suffering, and I wasn't quite sure. And after I've been in my Alexander training, I realized that a good portion of these people were suffering from unnecessary, harmful muscular holdings of the head, neck, and back. And I realize now in retrospect that if I would have just been keen enough to observe these people as they walked to the chair and sat down in the chair, that I might have been able to help them with their pain. My belief and my understanding of pain of the head, neck, and back is that, as Janet Travell, who was actually Kennedy's personal physician, said that pain of the head and neck and back is 90% muscular holding patterns, and I believe that to be an understatement.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that you would say that before you had any Alexander training, you sent the people away feeling a little uneasy about that because you weren't able to help them. But it is also true that a lot of dentists do work with TMJ, and I'm assuming that you're having studied the Alexander technique, that maybe your approach to TMJ might be different than
yes,
most dentists. Would that be fair to say?
I think there's a growing trend among dentists to recognize that the movements of the lower jaw, or what is called the mandible, is not a joint-centric, or it's not something that happens in a bone-to-bone relationship or a hinge-type movement, but rather these movements are controlled by muscles. I think it's important for someone who wants to perhaps be able to undertake a way to relieve their own pain, to become their own therapist, so to speak, recognize the suspensory nature of the lower jaw. I think that's a fact that can only work to people's benefit who are suffering from what is called TMJ. First of all, is kind of a catch-all phrase. It's also called craniomandibular disorders or craniofacial pain disorders, or more accurately, temporomandibular dysfunction. TMD is what the pain caused from muscular holdings is more accurately referred to. The temporomandibular joint can be affected by clenching or unnecessary holding of the jaw, and there can actually be pathology in the joint. But I think the answer lies in being able to release these unnecessary muscular holdings. The suffering of people afflicted with TMD are legion. Some of the symptoms of TMD are crippling headaches, destruction of the dentition, disturbed sleep patterns, pain up and down the shoulder girdle and into the arm. There's just a widespread variety of symptoms that people who are suffering from this unnecessary holding exhibit. And a lot of times they'll seek medical treatment first because they don't really think that these far-flung symptoms have anything to do with the way that they're holding their lower jaw. And typically physicians will prescribe either muscle relaxants or analgesics, potent narcotics, and all of these have a price to pay. And I think that for a good portion of people, that relief can come in an organic, sustainable way without punishing the rest of your body. And indeed, by freeing your jaw and freeing your neck, there can be benefits throughout your body. So in terms of balance, coordination.
Right. So would it be your suggestion then that someone who is suffering from TMJ, that maybe the very first thing they do is gather some accurate information about how the jaw functions, how their jaw functions?
I think so. I think in order to relieve a problem, you first have to become aware of the problem, and to become aware of temporomandibular dysfunction. Mm-hmm. First of all, the reason it's called temporomandibular is there's a large bone on the side of the head called the temporal bone, and there's a series of muscles that control the lower jaw or the mandible. So that's where temporomandibular comes in. If you can picture that almost like the strings of a marionette are the muscles, and the jaw is the marionette being controlled by these muscles. And if you can, well, let's start with just some basic anatomy here, where people can locate where their temporomandibular joint is.
Yes, I think that would be excellent. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If now I'm gonna suggest people putting their little fingers in their ears with their palms facing forward, but I'm a little bit hesitant to do that because then they won't hear the rest of the instructions. So maybe they ought to listen to what I suggest they do first of all, and then go ahead and place their little fingers. So if you put your little fingers, palm facing forward, into your ear opening, and then move your jaw from side to side, and what you feel moving there is the head, what's called the head of the condyle. You can feel that moving around as you move from side to side. Okay,
that's just a discussion of the Alexander technique as it applies to muscular pain, particularly temporomandibular joint pain, TMJ pain, which I suffered from for years. I had a physical therapist said I had the worst TMJ that he'd ever seen. But I found relief from letting go of unnecessary tension in my jaw by doing things like saying the word Boston. So when you say Boston, the lower jaw releases down and away, and it puts your jaw into its natural resting position. So where your jaw is after you say the word Boston, that's where it should be resting most of the time. Your teeth should not be coming together, except for in meeting, except for very, very rare instances. So it's a dysfunction when you start clenching your teeth. And so what does all this have to do with bringing souls out of hiding? Well, when we're stuck in these patterns of unnecessary muscular tension, it's very hard for us to come out of hiding. All right. If we're tense in our body, we're going to be tense in our mind. We're going to be brittle in our emotions. We're not going to flow through life. Right? We're not going to glide through life. We're not likely to have easy relationships with other people if we're fundamentally ill at ease with ourselves. And all prosperity comes from relationships with other people. So let me read a little bit more from this book, Earn What You Deserve, How to Stop Under-Earning and Start Thriving by Gerald Mundis. And he suggests a lot of great exercises in this book. Write the heading under-earning on a sheet of paper. Beneath it, list all the ways you can think of in which you have actively or passively under-earned over the last 12 months. For example, have you sought work for which you're not qualified? Have you spent a lot of time on projects that weren't going to make you much money? Have you incurred heavy and unnecessary expenses? Have you told a prospective client that you didn't know how to do what he hired you to do? You exhausted yourself during non-working hours so that you can give your best at work. Have you refused work or earning opportunities? Have you given more time to a job than you were paid to give? Did you quit a job without having a source of new income? Did you remain in a job that didn't pay enough to meet your needs, paid you just barely enough? Were you repeatedly late to work, frustrating your employer? Did you take frequent time off? Did you fail to ask for help or advice? Did you spend money you didn't have using credit cards? Did you let other people support you? Did you fail to use your abilities or time in an income-producing way? Challenging exercise, but valuable.
Okay, so that is the bottom half of the temporomandibular joint. And this is where the jaw articulates with the skull. At this point, if you go up just a little bit from where you feel that condyle moving around, that's skull, immovable bone. A lot of people have the idea that when the jaw opens, that there's a hinge axis there. If you can think of like a box with a hinge on one side, and you turn the box over, and as the lid swings open, that's the way the lower jaw opens. And in fact, that isn't the case. And having that body image can lead to a lot of problems. It constricts your movement, and it also constricts your neck and puts pressure on your larynx. It actually is uncomfortable, even though you can make that movement, that hinge axis movement. It's uncomfortable to do that. Another misconception.
Could we? I think it might be good just to elaborate on that a little bit. A hinge joint, as you say, might be opening and closing a box, or opening and closing a door, which actually is on a hinge. It's a very simple movement, and it may look as though that's what your jaw does, but as you say, it's somewhat more complicated than that. And I think it's probably fair to say that there's a sliding forward,
yes,
of that condyle,
exactly right,
as the mouth opens, so that as you open your mouth, your jaw not only lowers in space, let's say, but also has a little tendency to release. I'm not sure how to describe that direction, a forward,
well, forward and down, and you can
forward and down. When you say the word Boston, your jaw Boston will tend to release forward and down. And then you can notice what are your unnecessary holding patterns with your jaw. So I remember it was September of 2010, and I'd been at someone's home for a Sabbath lunch. And at the end of the meal, the hostess asked me, "What's the matter, Luke? You haven't said anything inappropriate all meal. We even have two single women here, and normally I get triggered when they're single, available, attractive women around, and I start acting out. And these were people I'd known for more than a decade, so I'm usually the king of inappropriate, and I've ruined many a festive gathering. So I tend to get overstimulated by the presence of attractive single women and starting asking all sorts of personal questions. But this day I was able to say 2 years of Alexander Technique. I used to be easily triggered. I was stuck in startle response, and when I'd get a stimulus, I'd go into fight or flight. My habitual reactions didn't serve me well. I could shut up with great effort, or I could interact from a disturbed place. Those were my choices because my head-neck relationship was disturbed. My whole self was disturbed, but now I found some freedom and poise. When I was a kid, I looked like a Holocaust survivor. I was that depressed, and so ever since then, I've been a little bit off in the way I relate to myself and to other people. Even after a decade in psychotherapy, I was still making inappropriate remarks on a regular basis. After decades of commitment to Judaism, I was still acting out. I was locked and loaded in my body, just a gun waiting to go off because I had that much unnecessary body tension. So people these days ask me if I'm tranquil because I'm more religious, or because I'd grown this long beard and had the responsibility of representing Judaism to the world, or was it the therapy, or was I just getting older? Perhaps I was maturing at last. Maybe those things had helped, but the main thing that changed me 2009, 2010 was training to be an Alexander Technique teacher, because I learned to let go of many of the unhelpful ways that I had traditionally responded to life. I'm no longer stuck in that 24/7 pattern of fight or flight. I'm not compressing myself as much. I'm not shoving all my organs and frustrations together in a downward cycle of needless tension, reduced functioning, because I'm more competent and graceful with the tasks of daily life. Not as angry with myself and with other people. I'm not as frustrated with my body, not as frustrated with my life, and therefore I'm not as needy for cheap thrills and quick releases. So I feel more tranquil these days. I can just tell myself to allow my neck to be free so that my head can release forward and up, so I can let go of my tendency to hunch my shoulders and to instead think them out wide, releasing to the side. Think of my back lengthening and widening. While I consider my arms emerging from my back and think about their length from my shoulders to my elbows, from my elbows to my hands, and then think about the length of my fingers, letting them uncurl out of formerly locked fists. So because I'm more at ease with myself, I pick fewer fights. I don't need my fists as much. And I'm learning to be at ease with myself, with the way I talk and stand and sit and blog and blunder. And I no longer compress myself as much when I feel awkward. Hence my feelings of dis-ease are reduced. Don't tend to stiffen my neck as much these days, and because there are more joints in the neck than anywhere else in your body, if you tighten your neck or compress your neck, your whole body gets tightened and compressed. So through the Alexander Technique, I learned to let go of the layers of unnecessary tension that cramped me for decades. I have more length and width, and with it more freedom and poise, more peace, joy. Okay, back to this interview on TMJ.
Forward and down, yeah, that would
by putting your fingers back in your ears and then closing your teeth together, you can feel the head of your lower jaw, the head of the condyle, closing the temporal mandibular space. You can actually feel that ball on the top of your lower jaw moving up and constricting your joint space. Mm-hmm. Try that. Just put your little fingers in your ear again and close your teeth together, and you can feel that space closing down. Mm-hmm. And then by way of contrast, when you put your fingers back in your ear, just open your lower jaw, and you can immediately can't feel that head of the condyle anymore. It immediately drops forward and down where you can't palpate it anymore. So that lets you know that there's an arc going on. And what we found through computer tracking of the lower jaw, the movements of the lower jaw, is that if you think of a center of rotation, like the jaw, if the point of the chin
Matt in Los
is
Angeles,
at the outer
under
portion of
thanks, Mark, for asking me. And thank you to those who went before me for years. Sorry for the raspiness in my voice, just getting over a little something. thank you to those who went before me for years, paving this path. This is my fourth program, UA, and I balked at it at first. The woman who's now my wife first presented it to me. She had gone to a UA Share Day out in LA back in November 2011. She came home and she said, "There's this thing you ought to check out, UA." And I said, "Oh, no, I'm good, babe." And that was, as it says in the big book, that was another example of a problem of my own making. My first sponsor said, "The problem is you don't know what the problem is." And in the big book, page 62, so our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the under-earner is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we under-earners must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. So for myself, and I use God as a shorthand, but for me, it's a power that's greater than my fear, bigger than my ego, and definitely deeper than my imagination. And for me, I can't do this without a power that's greater than myself. And I certainly can't do it alone. And the troubles for me as an under-earner really were of my own making. I came from a background, like a lot of people, with a lot of abuse and deprivation. But somewhere along the line, I took the information that I gathered, the emotional information and the pictures that I saw, and I took that and I built a life on it. And then I blamed myself and God and other people for perpetuating that life.
Okay, I want to go back to this book, How to Earn What You Deserve. And he suggests another exercise: write down all the ways you see other people under-earn, such as setting low fees, low rates, insisting on getting things their own way, continuing to employ unproductive employees. Now get creative and add every other way you can think of, claiming that emotional problems prevent one from working, arguing constantly with co-workers and supervisors, which results in never being promoted, not honoring commitment. So these are just ways that other people are under-earning. It's often easier to see what other people are doing than what you do. Then list 5 emotions you have about money. Just write them down. And then list the first 7 declarative statements that come into your mind about money. So a declarative statement is a simple statement of fact or belief. Keep them short. For example, there's never enough of it, or don't know what to do with it. Then look over the declarative statements you put down. This list reveals to you your major beliefs about money, about your relationship to money, and you'll get clarity. So one guy, Tony, furniture designer, listed these emotions: rage, frustration, despair, longing, sadness. And his statements were, "There's never enough. I try and try, but nothing ever works out. I don't know what to do. I want to scream at people with money. Life is not fair. I'm too old, too worn out to make it. It's hopeless. I can't make enough." So when these negative beliefs are backed up by powerful negative emotions, they tend to be self-fulfilling to create their own reality in your life. That's why it's important for you to know what is really going on within you, ruled by such beliefs, but only partly aware of them, if at all. You'll have a difficult time liberating yourself from under-earning.
And in short, I became a victim. And victims don't have a choice. So what the steps do is they give me the power of conscious choice back. Having had a spiritual awakening, I get the power of conscious choice back. And I see that there's no way that I'm actually disconnected from God, myself, or my fellows. For me, it's spiritually, mathematically impossible for me to be disconnected from God. But I can feel like I'm disconnected from God. I've had plenty of experiences in my life where I was disconnected from God. And for me, untreated under-earning will lead me to death. That's not being dramatic. That's just the reality of my situation. It may be a quick death. For example, I may be going through a stretch of exhaustion, and I caught a thought recently where I said to myself, I'm so tired. I don't know how to slow down. Maybe I could just get into a car accident so I end up, not a serious one, but serious enough that I'd have to be in a hospital for several days, and then I could just rest. Like, that's the under-earning thinking.
Wow, that is such a powerful example. I remember before I collapsed into chronic fatigue syndrome, I kept thinking, I'm either going to break through or break down. Either way, I'll get the love that I need. And so if you're under-earning, if you're poor and frustrated, your hold on life is much more likely to be tenuous. much more likely to have these dangerous, destructive thoughts. I don't know if you've seen the TV show Fleabag, but the protagonist in it had a best friend who became depressed about her boyfriend cheating on her. So this girl, depressed girl, thought, oh, I'll just get into a small car accident and then he'll come visit me in the hospital, and that will bring us back together. Well, that small car accident that she planned ended up killing her. So the Torah keeps talking about, I set before you this day a choice between life and death. Choose life. And I think it realizes that our hold on life is often fairly tenuous. And so if you find yourself having thoughts like this, oh, maybe I'll just get into a small car accident so that I can rest for a few days, that's just an example of how these compulsions, these addictions, these process addictions can absolutely kill you.
Right there. Which is silly when I say it out loud, and that's why I say it out loud. So it could be a quick death or it could be a long, slow death. But either way, for me, staying in the cave is staying in the cave, and it's soul suicide. And this program requires that I grow in public. It requires that I expose myself and I expand, and it requires that I do it in relationship. It's impossible for me to do this by myself because the problems I see are of my own making, and they came from me. So the first question that I have to ask in my recovery is, where is God in this picture? And what I see, looking at where I came from, having gone through the steps, I've been in the program about 2.5 years now. Went through all 11 steps with the first sponsor, and then I made a change and went through all 12 steps with the second sponsor. And I spent almost 2 years just going through steps before I sponsored anybody. And I'm really glad that I did it that way, because it gave me an understanding of what under-earning looks like and what the process of recovery looks like that I wouldn't have had if I had just gone through it quickly.
So one of the things that I've done is keep a list of everything that gives me energy. So the appropriate use of alkaline water, I find, gives me energy. So you don't want to drink it at mealtime. You don't want to drink it, say, an hour before a meal or until 2 hours after a meal. But and you don't want to, I find I don't want to drink it after about 2 p.m. or I'm not going to sleep well that day. But I find the appropriate use of alkaline water energizing. And to get anything done in life, you need energy. So human connection with certain people, I find energizing. Living out my goals, living out my vision, I find energizing. Listening to inspiring speakers like this guy, Matt, I find energizing. Reading great books like Earn What You Deserve by Gerald Mundis and doing the exercises in them, I find energizing. Having a sponsor and working with her every week, I find energizing. So it's important for me. Cold showers. I keep a list of all the things that add energy to my life.
I've just done a step study and never actually spent that time with a sponsor. I'm not saying anything against step studies, but I'm just talking about my personal process and the depths that I needed to have in terms of my awareness. I needed to be able to have, as it says in the big book, accurate self-appraisal. And I can do that now. I needed to be able to be in right relationship with God, myself, or my fellows at any given time. And I can do that now. It doesn't mean that I am, but that's what a 10th step is for. But I can do that. I have the capacity to do that because I have the power of conscious choice back. So in doing my inventory, what I see is I come up through all.
So the chat says I can't do cold showers. Well, you can. And just go do it. And then think about all the other things that you're telling yourself that you can't do, but you actually can do them. So it's important to build these muscles of self-discipline. And if you do it first thing in the day, then you've accomplished the most difficult part of your day in the first 30 seconds there. Here's more advice from Earn What You Deserve. Stick with the winners. This may sound elitist or brutally Darwinian, but it isn't. It's the only principle that makes sense. To do otherwise would be simply to strengthen the power of the malady over you. So who are the winners? People with pots of money, people who've never under-earned a day in their life, people with high incomes? No, not for our purposes. Someone who's never had a drinking problem can't help an alcoholic get sober. He has no comprehension of what alcoholism is. He has no experience of it. Thus, though he may be sympathetic and willing to help, he is at a loss as to how to do so in any truly meaningful way. Nor can the drunk on the next stool help, while he has a lot of experience with the problem, he's not someone with the solution. So also with under-earning. Someone who's never had a problem with it can't help in any truly meaningful way. Even if she's a whiz with money herself, and someone who's still under-earning herself is experienced only with the problem, not with the solution. Winner is someone who's come from the same place you're in now, who's now recovering from under-earning, and who has something in his life that you'd like in your life, a joy, a peace, tranquility, enthusiasm, delight, a capacity to get up in the morning with pleasure, the ability to laugh easily. None of these people set out to free themselves from under-earning because of an excess of joy. Each person started from a bottom, from a place of pain and despair. I already know how to under-earn. I don't need any help with that. I already know how to feel despair, fear, hopelessness, how to experience frustration, anger, and self-pity. What I need is to listen to people who know those things too, but who have been able to emerge from that darkness. I need to find out how they did it, what they did. When you want to find a job, you don't ask someone who's been on welfare for 20 years how to do it. Where can you find the winners? Currently, nearly anyone who's freeing himself from under-earning and who is committed to that freedom, who is willing to go to any lengths to achieve it, is a winner. In places where there are few or perhaps no such persons, you can draw support from people you admire and respect, who have something in their lives you'd like to have in yours, and who are members of other self-help groups, especially those based on the 12 steps. Go back to Matt here.
All of the mess that I made, pretty much me as an under-earner, and the life that I built on it, and all the blaming that I did as a victim. And as a victim, of course, I don't have choice. And as a victim, the only good antidote for me as a victim is entitlement. Somebody screwed me. My mom abused me, so somebody owes me a job, or my wife owes me this, or my dad wasn't there for me, so my boss owes me. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thinking. Or somebody owes me a parking spot. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make sense, but the thinking is entrenched. And a lot of people will buy into it. I have found that when I sell myself short, lots of people are buying. There's no shortage of people that will line up and support me in my misery. It's really important that I stay with those who are living a light of recovery in this program, that I stay close, that I listen, that I learn, that I remain teachable, and commit myself to having a beginner's mind. So I go through this inventory process, and I see it makes sense why at 38 years old and with a degree from a big school back east, I was working at a grocery store making $12 an hour, sleeping 4 hours a night.
Okay, this is the first speaker that I encountered on this topic, and as you can sense, this guy just blew me away. He seems to have genuine recovery. Another one of the 12-step programs that deals with these problems is Financial Under-Earners Anonymous. It's a separate group from Under-Earners Anonymous. And they say we have the formula for change. 1, find a mentor, a sponsor to serve as a role model. 2, find and study the highest quality, accurate information available. 3, connect with and build a pipeline to God. Then repeat the process until the new behavior becomes internalized into character.
4 to 5 hours a night, waking up at 4 in the morning to unload grocery trucks with kids who are half my age. It makes sense why I went from having a burgeoning career, being flown around the world, highly visible, to bagging groceries for the same people that I used to be in that work with.
Imagine how humiliating that would be, to be bagging groceries for people that you used to fly around the world with to make movies. So find someone who can, through their own example, show you how to connect to good information, to God, to a higher power, and to prosperous actions. Then practice the actions daily until they become who you are. This is the essence of the AA's Step 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out.
When I start to see my under-earning for what it is, it makes sense why my life took the trajectory that it did. And I can see how the troubles were of my own making. So what it was like was, for me, like a lot of people, there's no shortage of education. I know I'm intelligent. I know I have gifts, and I can't get out of my own way. And in my mind, in my unrecovered mind, there's no good reason why things aren't happening for me. And that goes right into victim thinking. Why me? Because I should have ... So as I approach and go through a thorough inventory, I start to see what my part is in things. And in seeing my part, I start to get my power of conscious choice back. And I get to see what it was like, what I was like. It was good. It was good. Doesn't mean that the life I was experiencing was good, but there was always good and prosperity available. There was always love available, always. It may have been hard to see, but as an under-earner, it's really hard for me to see that stuff anyway.
So step 2 in these programs is we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity or restore us to prosperity. So an assignment you can do is write in a notebook, has my earning power been enough to help me achieve prosperity in my life? Has my education helped me achieve the prosperity that I want? Has my social status helped me achieve the prosperity I want? Has my gender, race, or ethnicity helped me achieve the prosperity I want? Has my willpower, creativity, or social skills helped me achieve the prosperity I want? Have I been successful and prosperous doing things my way? Am I satisfied with how my life has turned out? Is it possible that there is another better way to tap into earning power? Where can I find sources of earning power outside myself? Am I willing to go to any length to make connection with an earning power outside myself, greater than myself, a power greater than myself that many people call God?
But I know, as the big book suggests, what we were like, what happened, and what we are like now, that I had the problem. And I was the problem in many, many cases. And life was just life, but I had a problem, and I was the problem, and I was a problem for a lot of people. And then I got help, and now I'm part of the solution. So the inventory shows me that, but before I even get into the inventory, I can go back to the first step where I admit that I'm powerless over my under-earning. And to me, to admit is to let in. If I take the word at face value from a dictionary definition, one of the definitions is to admit is to let in. So when I look at that first step, what I do is I begin to let in the truth. I begin to start to deal in reality. And the truth is that I'm powerless over this thing called under-earning. The troubles are of my own making, and I can't stop it. And I can't even necessarily see it. But the other thing that I discovered in the step work that was really helpful for me is that I had come in on a lie. And the lie is that I am separate. Even though I'd come in with recovery from 3 other programs, the lie is that I'm separate. And from that place of separation, I'm going to do all kinds of things, most of which are not going to work out so good for me.
Yeah, this is a profound insight. Once we discover our connection with our best selves, with other people, and with God, then prosperity starts to flow. So looking at financialunderearnersanonymous.org, their list of symptoms. 1, we find we cannot reach higher levels of earning despite our best efforts to do so. The conventional pieces of earning power like social status, socioeconomic background, gender, race, education level, willpower, creativity, leadership, somehow not effective in helping us to prosper. 2, we feel a deep sense of shame and humiliation when we are unemployed and people ask us innocent questions such as, what do you do for a living, or where do you work? Because we cannot answer the questions in a positive manner. We spend money on little luxuries or choose the cheapest option because we know we cannot afford the big ticket items or even the medium-priced items that we really want. 4, we bought high and sold low. When investing in property, stock, art, or other commodities, we notice we continually bought items for top dollar but then consistently sold them at a loss. 5, we consistently felt and were stuck in jobs or careers where we were earning less than what we needed to cover all our needs, some of our wants, and still have money left over to put into savings. In short, we were financially under-earning. So a way to assess your sobriety with regard to under-earning is to get an accurate sense of, say, your annual expenses. How much do you need to live? So if it's, say, $50,000 a year, then don't take any new work that pays you less than $50 an hour. So to explain that number, if you need $50,000 a year to live at your present level, then what kind of salary would you need for 40 hours a week to reach that? And I think you'd need something like a minimum of $25 an hour to meet your basic expenses, then double that number so that you can have room for prosperity and for savings. So if your annual expenses are $50,000 a year, then don't take work that pays you less than $50 an hour. If your and your expenses are $100,000 a year, then don't take work that pays you less than $100 an hour. At symptom 6, we avoided promotions or taking on more responsibility at work because the financial compensation did not seem equal to the additional work. We felt unmotivated by small increases in pay. 7, we were financially disorganized at work and in life, having no plan, trajectory, or larger vision. Our path of earning was meandering and directionless. Our diminished income was a result of this vagueness. Symptom 8, we secretly felt uneasy with achieving and receiving higher levels of income. We found ourselves in conflict with building healthy bridges between money, God, and spirituality. 9, we often felt a sense of entitlement, thinking the world owed us more income, or a sense of resentment over not receiving our fair share of the profits.
Me or for others. So that first step, admitting the truth, is beginning to connect. And if I look at the later steps, if I go back to the later steps in the program, step 12, the joy of living is the theme of UA. Right? It's right there, page 106 in the 12 and 12. Step 11 in the 12 and 12, page 105. I'm going to pull it up right here for myself. Page 105 talks about perhaps one of the greatest gifts of prayer and meditation is the sense of belonging. Step 9 talks about, at the end of step 9, it says, above all, as we begin to go through this immense process, that we begin to take responsibility for the well-being of others. So if I work backwards and I look at 10, 11, 9, 10, 11, 12, I see that these are all about being in right relationship. And so I look at my first step and I see, I came in on a lie, and the lie was that I was separate. I had a compulsive inability or unwillingness to be in right relationship. As an under-earner, I have a compulsive inability or unwillingness to receive good in my life. Prosperity, I was told, and I hang on to this, is about good things coming easily. So when I'm at step 1, I admit that I'm powerless, and I start to let the truth in. And the truth is that I'm powerless over this idea that I'm separate, that I'm an under-earner, and that I could or should or deserve to be in this cave, and that I'm...
Okay, symptom number 10, according to financialunderearnersanonymous.org, we experienced a pattern of living downwards to our level of financial under-earning, rather than prosperously earning upward to our ideal standard of living. 11, prosperity deflection. When money is offered to us, we often said no thanks, when it would have been just as easy and more prosperous to say yes thanks. We frequently viewed offered money with suspicion, fear, unease, distrust, or contempt. 12, when faced with multiple job offers, we choose the lower paying one, even if the jobs are all equal in workload. When asked for our salary requirements, we give a lowball figure instead of asking for top dollar or for what is competitive. 13, we experience vagueness, confusion, fear, and embarrassment around knowing the exact figure we need to earn to afford all our needs, some of our wants, and still have enough left over to put into savings. 14, we have subjugated ourselves to others whose earning power was greater than ours. We entered into relationships of dependency, hiding under the wings of others instead of spreading our own wings and establishing our own financial independence. We were unable to support ourselves and accepted contributions from others in exchange for our autonomy. Not understanding the price for doing so was a loss of self-esteem, self-respect, and personal dignity. I remember Holly Randall, the photographer, was talking on a podcast, and she said she had this bad habit of dating broke writers, and she would naturally tend to pay for everything, and that this would bother most of the guys that she dated, but she said for some reason it never bothered Luke. In symptom 15, we financially under-earn, do not have enough money to pay for our expenses, then make up the shortfall by using credit, taking out loans, or going into debt. Thus we become trapped in a cycle of under-earning, debting, and losing our solvency.
I'm entitled to get out of it. And then in step 2, I'm able to look at the insanity of things. And it's very clear in the big book, again on page 62, that last paragraph, just above the last paragraph, we had to have God's help. This is the how and the why of it. First, we had to quit playing God. So I had to quit being the trouble of my own making. And I had to see that there was something beyond me that would qualify as sanity, soundness of mind. And then step 3, I can make a choice. My third step was not dramatic. A lot of my recovery in UA is disappointingly undramatic. Serenity is not the opposite of chaos. Serenity is a whole other realm. Chaos is like a snow globe that you shake, and the snow falls back down, and you say, "Oh, look at the world I control. I'm the mayor of Snow Globe." But chaos and serenity don't function in the same place. So I start to see in my third step, oh, I've got a choice here. I'm actually going to choose the power that's going to take me towards sanity. And that doesn't mean I'm going to lay down and die. It doesn't mean I'm going to roll over and let God take me. It means that I'm going to surrender the actions I've been taking. And as it says in step 3, I'm going to utilize willingness in action. I'm going to surrender the actions I've been taking, and I'm going to take action that's going to...
Okay, let's just play a little clip of Milo here from the Ralph Retort talking about his vault of Richard Spencer recordings. So, yeah, how about a little gay alt-right gossip?
I'm perfectly happy. I have an external hard drive. I'll show it to you now. This is called the Vault. This is the Vault. This has shit on everyone you have ever heard of. Video, pictures, emails, audio, text messages, phone calls, anything you'd ever really want to know about every public figure I have ever encountered. Most of the conversations I've had with people when I've been in a single-party consent state, recorded, archived. I have shit on everyone. And I'm now in a position in my career where I'm perfectly happy to start dropping it all. So I have a lot of crap on Richard Spencer and everybody else. And maybe there is a reason to sign up for Telegram after all. So watch this space.
Except
I have...
Okay, I'm not sure how much recovery is there in that message, but yeah, there are things to learn. So the number one way that you tick off people is by being dishonest, having an exaggerated sense of your own importance, saying one thing while doing another. So dishonesty will tick people off and give them incentives to hurt you. When you step on other people's toes in your pursuit of what you want, they're going to want to get back at you. So, yeah, there is a spiritual message there.
Move me in a different direction with the understanding that there's a power greater than myself, or even the willingness to understand that there's a power greater than myself. So how do I know I've taken a thorough third step? Because I'm willing and I take action to do my fourth step, and I clean house. And I was guided through 5 columns in the fourth step, and the first column is who I resent. And just as far as the personal resentments go, who I resent, second column, why. Third column, what it affects. Fourth column, what my part is. This is where I begin to take responsibility, that fourth column, what my part is. And then I was asked to write a fifth column. What could you have done, or what could you do now? And that's where I see the power of choice. There was something else available to me there. I may not have seen it, and I may not have chosen it, but there was something else there. And that's God for me. That's the +1. God is the +1 in any equation.
Okay, some related questions from the 12-step approach to financial prosperity. Where can I find sources of earning power outside myself? Am I willing to go to any length to make a connection with an earning power outside myself? Imagine if you had 10 times the amount of earning power, would that be enough to help you achieve prosperity? Imagine if you had 100 times your current earning, would that help you achieve prosperity? Am I willing to try something new? Am I willing to let someone else teach me or guide me? Am I willing to set aside any resistance or rebellion I have against taking direction? Am I willing to take baby steps through my fear, if success and prosperity are waiting for me on the other side?
So when I go into step 6, or when I finish up with step 5, I have an accurate self-appraisal of the exact nature of my wrongs. The exact nature, right? This is a disease of vagueness. I was told what happens in vagueness stays in vagueness. The problem is you don't know what the problem. So it's a disease of vagueness. So I start to get clarity, and clarity is power. And I say, here's the exact nature of my wrongs. And then I practice the intimacy of going to my sponsor or to somebody else that you trust and saying, here's the exact nature of my wrongs. I would like to have these wrongs removed, and that's going to propel me towards step 6 and step 7. I hear a lot of people say what I said when I came into the program, and that is, I've got trust issues. I don't know about finding a sponsor. It's too hard to find a sponsor. You know, I've got trust issues. Of course I've got trust issues. That's why I'm an under-earner.
Okay, more questions to ponder. Am I ready to make a decision to commit myself to recovery from debting or under-earning? How do I understand earning power? Is earning power something I can trust and believe in? Am I open to the idea that God, higher power, earning power can take the form of earning? Am I willing to take a break from doing things my own way? Even if it's just a little bit, take just a little direction. Am I ready to try a different approach to recovery from debting and under-earning? This step, the third step, had an image associated with it. What would it look like? How will you reward yourself for taking positive actions? There's step 3, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. Throughout our lives as addicts, alcoholics, debtors, under-earners, underachievers, we often faced a side of ourselves that seemed to be our solution but eventually turned into our deepest problem. This wolf in sheep's clothing seduced us into making love to a gorilla. Eventually, we learned it's not over until the gorilla was finished. This refers to our tendency to try to handle our problems by ourselves, believing in and using our own willpower to try to fix problems on our own, by ourselves, in isolation, turned out to be a critical strategic mistake that has cost many addicts their lives. When an addict tries to fight his disease on his own, they are essentially making love to a gorilla, and it ain't going to be over till the gorilla is finished. The disease will beat the addict every time. We have to admit, we were powerless over the disease, that our individual willpower was not enough. But there is a way to fight back. That's by turning over our lives and our will over to the care of God as we understand God.
Well, I'm in UA. So having trust issues and using that as a reason to not get a sponsor does not make you unique. It makes you one of us. And the process of working with a sponsor is an opportunity to practice that intimacy through daily work, step work, revealing myself, the true nature of myself. So I get clear for myself about the exact nature of my wrongs, and then I can go ahead and I can say to, in this case, my sponsor, here's the exact nature of my wrongs. And then I'm going to go to God and say, I'd like to have these removed. Humbly. And if I look at the dictionary definition of, which I have, the one that I refer to, the dictionary definition of humble is to accept the truth. Humility is to live the truth. And humiliation is being caught avoiding the truth. And I came in here a humiliated under-earner because I was avoiding the truth. And the truth was, I thought I was separate. I thought I was special, different. I thought I was so low or so great that made me special and different either way. And I also thought that I had power over my under-earning, this thing that I couldn't even name.
So we can win over this disease. So I used to hate that term disease for these process addictions, but it works. It's a useful metaphor. It's not a disease like cancer. Sharing the disease, the problem, the compulsion is different from spreading the disease. Sharing the disease is the same as asking other people to help share the burden of trying to lift 500 pounds. If enough people pitch in, the weight is spread out over a larger area and it can be lifted. Spreading the disease is like taking all 500 pounds, dropping it on the head of another single person. It will squash them like it squashes you. So we learn not to dump our problem onto another person, but instead to share our problem so that many others can help lift the problem with us. When the Amish community as a family needs to build a new barn, they dedicate a weekend where the entire community comes together and builds the barn. As a community, they can do in a matter of hours what it may take a single person months to accomplish. Many hands make for light work. This is the value of sharing. In program, we share our disease and we also share our recovery. When we learn how to do step 3, making a conscious decision to turn our life over to the care of God, we are learning how to share our will and our life with others with a higher power. Sharing involves surrender. Sharing is an expression of individual ownership while also allowing other people into the process. Sharing lets people into your life.
So when I'm humble, and I'm not a judge, it's not for me to be a judge of whether I'm humble or not. I'll leave that for a consciousness greater than mine. But I know for myself that when I'm humble, I'm living the truth, and I'm committed to that in this program. And humility is practicing the truth, accepting the truth. And humiliation is being caught avoiding the truth. And that fourth step is a fact-finding mission, which has right there on paper for me the hundreds of examples of how I've avoided the truth. I've been living that lie. And then I moved from 7 into 8, And I want to be in right relationship in 7. That's what I'm talking about. I want to be right size. So that means I need to be whatever size I am. So Matt needs to be whoever Matt is, not bigger than Matt, not smaller than Matt, not bigger than somebody else, not who I should have been. Matt's going to be whoever Matt is. That's being right sized. And then as part of that, the trifecta, right? I spend the first 7 steps starting to get into right relationship with myself and my God and my sponsor.
15 minutes or over.
Thank you. I start to get in right relationship with myself and my God. And then the trifecta, the third part of that is I'm going to go out and get right with others. All of my success is about relationship. In my business, in my marriage, in my friendships, in my recovery, it's all about relationship. So that 8th step, I make a list of all the people that I've harmed because I want to make the effort to go get in the right relationship. 9th step, I go about making amends, and before they're halfway through, I start to realize that fear of financial insecurity is leaving me, and fear of people is leaving me, right? Fear of people is leaving me, which means that the haze, the thick haze of isolation is leaving me. And then step 10, I keep regular tabs on this so I don't have to, so I can continue to stay in right relationship. Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation. Prayer and meditation are a principal means of conscious contact with our God. It's not a halfway thing. I ask friends of mine and people I sponsor, when they call me up and they say, I'm blah, 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 and they start unloading, first thing I usually ask them is, did you pray on this? And most of the time people say no, which brings me back to the first step. You think that you're doing this alone. You think that you're separate. You are buying into the lie, and that's why you're stuck. And then step 12, having had a spiritual awakening, I practice these principles in all of my affairs to the best of my ability. So when you come in, if you're not in the steps yet and you're not in a sponsor, you can get to the tools. You're not working with a sponsor, you can get to the tools. And I was told right out of the gate to a 90-90, 1 meeting a day for 90 days. Use the first 3 tools once a day for 90 days. Time recording. There's a workshop. I was given tremendous help by the man who taught me the timesheet workshop, who showed me how to begin to utilize my time to work towards my vision and further my own goals. And it helped me see right there that there was enough time, there was enough love, and there wasn't money. So time recording, there's a recorded version of the workshop that's on the same library that today's share is being recorded on, and you can find that. Do the first 3 tools once a day for 90 days, time recording, attend meetings, and actively seek a sponsor. And also call up somebody. I called up 3 people I'd never spoken to before and said, can I read you the symptoms? And just give you have 15 minutes? Can I give you a yes or no? This applies to me, this doesn't apply to me. That began to break the cycle of isolation. Being on phone meetings, I was on meetings and I offered to be of service so that people knew I was there. If you're in a face-to-face meeting, you can see that I'm there. But if you're on a phone meeting and I don't speak up, you don't know that I'm there. And my under-earning is at work because it's going to keep me in that virtual cave. So what happens is I begin to exercise the muscles of willingness. And despite what I think and how I feel, I begin to take action.
Okay, so step 4 is we make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So this is the time we search through our inner self to discover any lurking resentments. Resentment is any feeling that keeps coming back. It's a replay, it's a recurring feeling, usually negative, that haunts us like a bad memory, like a restless ghost lurking in our heart, mind, and spirit. I'm reading from material from Financial Underearners Anonymous. These are feelings, memories, and past experiences that have left a mark with us, such that we cannot seem to let go of the pain they caused us, so that we can finally move on with our lives. Resentment usually has a compulsive or obsessive emotional quality to it. These underlying emotional memories or hurts from our past often get easily triggered when we are engaged with living our day-to-day lives. So for me, as I'd get older, these feelings would come back again and again and again, but with increasing intensity. We find that when the real world and the people in it trigger our old baggage, we lose our clarity and we lose our sanity as we slip into an emotional blackout drunk. We become unaware of our actions, our behaviors, how we treat others, how we lose touch with reality. We are emotionally and spiritually drunk and out of control, lashing outwards and lashing inwards, raging over the hurts of the past. Resentments are a form of temporary emotional insanity.
To me, this is not a program for those who want it. It's a program for those who do it. There's plenty of people who want it, and they're not doing anything. They want to be solvent, they want to be prosperous, and they're not doing anything. I take some of those calls. They would rather just whine about it. There's people that want to be saved instead of helped. Those that want to be helped have to take action.
2 minutes.
And I know, thank you, I have that entrenched victim mentality where I just need somebody to save me, but that's not going to do it here. So that's my experience with the 12 steps, and I continue. I'm in the process and have been of studying the traditions because that's really the next big picture here, that's traditions. And I noticed, I'm not sure why, but I noticed that it says in the format that was read, typically it says our recovery is based on working the 12 steps and abiding by the 12 traditions. And that part, abiding by the 12 traditions, is not in this format, which is questionable because this is a beginner's meeting. And the traditions are what's going to make this program safe for those of us who come in all wonky-eyed and foul-mouthed trying to tell everybody how things go. The traditions are going to make this a safe place to recover. And at this point in my life, self-care is my mandate. Part of my 12-step mandate is self-care. I have to take care of myself so the world doesn't have to take care of me, because my debting leads to people's under-earning. My lack of solvency leads to my under-earning. My belief that I'm by myself keeps me in the cycle of isolation. And those are all the old stories. And I just don't want to live that way. I just don't want to, even though I have this compulsive thing called under-earning that wants to suck me down. I would rather be in a life that I love. I'd rather be in a life that I love and build a life that I want to stay in. And the fastest way for me to do that, to live the life that I love, is to start loving the life that I have right now in small, small steps. And I don't do it alone, but I do it. This is the hardest program I've ever done, and I wouldn't trade it, wouldn't trade a lick of it. And I hope that you all experience the same grace and more than I've seen. Thank you.
So, yeah, meeting people like Matt has been an incredible boost to my recovery. We need other people, particularly people who have the same compulsions that we have and who have learned to overcome them. And how do we overcome these compulsions, these habits of under-earning, underachieving, debting, failure? So to move forwards in our recovery, we must uproot and face each of our resentments. We must take the opportunity to call our demons by their true name and to get help with releasing them. We surrender our resentments just as we surrender our disease. We're engaged in a struggle to reclaim our freedom. So write a list of everything around which you feel anger. Write a list of everything around which you feel fear. Write a list of everything around which you feel shame. Write a list of everything around which you feel guilt. Write a list of every sexual relationship. Write a list of any secrets you carry. And then get clear. Who do you resent? Why do you resent them? What part of your life did they affect? Was it your sex life, your social life, your self-esteem? And then what role did you play, if any? And then once you have a sense of the bad things you've done to others, you'll be in a much better place to forgive other people for the bad things that they've done to you. Just as you want sympathy and understanding for the circumstances that you've been in that have led you to do things that you're ashamed of, so too we need to extend that same kind of sympathy and understanding to other people.
I welcome the newcomers, Mandy, Miriam, Patricia, Tom, for things that being in UA has brought to me. So I'll begin with what it was like. It began I was introduced to this program in the spring of 2012, remembering it was probably after taxes when I looked at my earnings and thought about how hard I was working and how low these earnings were. And someone close to me who was in other recovery programs told me about UA, and as soon as I read the symptoms, I felt like, wow, has somebody been looking over my shoulder? I mean, I could relate to every single one of them. And I just crumbled and realized that this was something that I really needed. And I could just look back on my history. What comes to mind is a first grade report card that said, Susan is a perfectionist and she allows trifles to upset her. And so the disease is something that is in me. I mean, I was created this way, and the more that I am aware and recognizing that.
Okay, so there are a lot of great recorded talks in these programs. Remember, that's how I listened to my first talks in Under Earners Anonymous, Debtors Anonymous, Workaholics Anonymous, other programs that deal with money. I was able to find these recorded talks online, including many of them are on YouTube.
New York. And funny, sometimes my hands would just go into this position. So in a way, I was on a very primal level saying, God, please help me. Without knowing it, I would be at a red light and I'd be doing this. So sometimes the body is a lot wiser than the mind. Sometimes the body is a lot wiser than the mind. So then on the weekends, I would go to Channel 5 in New York and run the teleprompter machine. Now, this was really this undiluted cave. I would go back in the scenery. I'd be there at 5 o'clock, totally destroying my weekend. And I'd be sitting there with my magazines and whatever, the little television, and sitting behind the scenery, waiting for the first promo break at 7, whether it's tonight, 7 o'clock, 3 murders, 2 deaths, and extortion. And then at 10 o'clock, they hit the computer, run this thing, making the words move to this person so they could see the words at the same time. And then I'd go home, wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, drive back to the city, and make another $120 working for the sports reporters, doing the same thing. And so I was working 7 days a week. This was a 100% total deprivation life.
Okay, so step 5 is where we share our moral inventory with another person. Having worked the previous 4 steps, we now have an honest written inventory of our resentments, wrongs, and secrets, and we are ready to share this list with another person in the presence of our higher power. Step 5 is a step of freedom and intimacy. We are given the opportunity to empty ourselves of the emotional poison that has been sickening us for so long. We have the opportunity to experience freedom through sharing. We give ourselves permission to share ourselves with our sponsor. In the process of sharing in depth, we receive the experience and gift of intimacy. We give another person permission to see us for who we truly are, a person of conflicted desires, struggling with a wounded character, and an addiction to hurtful thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
100% total deprivation. Like if this was an AA, I'd be talking about coming out of rehab and detox and being at Murphy's Bar and lying in a pool of blood at 4 o'clock in the morning with my wife banging on the door. Did I have any leisure? No. Did I have any fun? No. Was I making really any money in a substantial, healthy way? No. Was I condemning me to not even having a weekend? Was I? No. Yes, I. Well, now, if I said yes and he said no about what I said about he said, then what he's saying about what I said was, basically, I was saying, no, Angie, you're not entitled to a weekend. You're not entitled to make enough money to pay taxes. What you're going to do is you're going to just like scrunch by, getting little bits of grain, little bits of thing, and go back to your little cave, and then you're not even going to have fun this weekend. You're not even going to be able to relax. So what I just spelled out was, before UA and DA, a 100% deprivation, under-earning reality. 100%. The reality that fostered UA was after 6 years of DA, and the thing about it was that, I love DA, I'm still in it, but I was saying, hey, how come I'm solvent and I'm living in an apartment with mice?
So Another way that we can heal is make a list of all our outstanding addictions or compulsions that are destructive. So many of us have a whole long list of process addictions. So for me, it's debting, it's porn, under-earning, unhealthy relationships, spending a lot of time in daydreaming. So get clear. Eating too much. So just make a list of these outstanding issues, maybe food, alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling. We're acting out our disease. These are all symptoms of a broken character. We learn we can bring each and every part of our character, our inner being, into our recovery. And you can choose then to address these problems often with the specific 12-step fellowship that addresses that problem. If you want a loaf of bread, you go to a grocery store. If you're a sex addict, you go to Sexaholics Anonymous or something akin to that. So there are a lot of great resources on YouTube.
Why am I solvent and living with mice? It doesn't make any sense. The mice are doing better than I am. And why am I sitting at this desk and looking out at a dumpster across the street? I mean, it didn't even occur to me to look for another apartment. And I was making $70,000 a year at the time. I was a single guy. I wasn't exactly qualified for the New York Times neediest cases, but I was living a total deprivation reality. I wasn't even allowing myself a decent place to live. The cup that was cracked, that started the thought about this fellowship, was cracked on that side, and I had coffee in it. And rather than throwing it away, I just turned it around and I just drank from the other side. I was committed to keeping on to that little bit of deprivation of having some porcelain just sticking out of the cup. And then I began to look around to the whole apartment, and it was dirty, and it was horrible. And in fact, I had a relationship once where this woman said, "Hey, Mike, you have your clothes are torn." I was wearing clothes that were torn. I was wearing shoes. I was wearing rocks. It was literally the whole disease. It was like seeing one of these clutter cars in New York where all there's like 3,000 magazines and newspaper ads, and there's just enough room for the driver to sit in the car. Ever see those? The guy said, "What's the problem? I can get into the car. There's no problem." So I didn't see there was a problem. So in step 2, came to believe that a power greater than myself would restore me to sanity came from really being in 12-step recovery, being in DA, and seeing that there was a spiritual change.
So DA stands for Debtors Anonymous, UA stands for Under-Earners Anonymous, FUA is Financial Under-Earners Anonymous, WA is Workaholics Anonymous. These are all different 12-step approaches to these problems. Looking at Financial Under-Earners Anonymous, their approach to step 7, we humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. After many years of repeated attempts and failures, many of us have learned the difficulty with trying to make personal change through the use of willpower alone. It's like trying to change the color of our eyes by holding our breath. Using an act of pure willpower to make a change is often the beginning of creating new wreckage for a person still in the grip of their disease. The alcoholic, true and authentic permanent inner change is nearly impossible if attempted alone. It's like a dentist trying to perform a root canal on himself with no outside help. The pain of the procedure overwhelms the patient. The dentist, while being skilled and professional, must surrender and seek the assistance of another dentist to accomplish what he cannot do himself. Much like the alcoholic, the debtor or the under-earner cannot change his disease simply by wishing it away. Even solitary prayer alone has not been enough to make these deep changes. Our struggle with character defects is identical to our struggle with our addiction to under-earning. Each defect is like an addiction. We are in the grip of a mental and physical compulsion to act, feel, and think in self-destructive ways. So how do we put these defects of character into remission? How do we find relief from our shortcomings? We invite God into the process. By God, we also mean higher power or earning power. We can invite the God of our understanding to express himself as earning power.
People had gone through, and I had gone through a spiritual change because I was paying my bills on time. I did have my bill shrine. I had a bill shrine where all the bills had a little magic marker thing on about when they were due, and I'd make sure they were in the mail by that time. So I had a bill shrine. So I knew that I had gone through a spiritual change in terms of debting. I was paying my taxes on time. I did not use credit cards. I didn't, well, that was before DA relapse, but at that time I was, I was in very good shape. So I knew I had gone through a spiritual change. So I said, if I can go through a spiritual change through DA, then there has to be this thing called UA. So step 3, made a decision to turn my life and my will over to the power greater than myself.
So we have these compulsions to self-destruct, but we can't quite put our finger on them. We have all sorts of habits of unnecessary tension and compression, of unnecessarily making ourselves small, of avoiding prosperity, of getting into destructive relationships, and we're just barely aware of them. And one way that I kind of opened up a path to start going to 12-step meetings was by taking Alexander Technique lessons. So this is video from something like 2011 here, taking an Alexander Technique lesson with Larry White.
I picked up their brochure, and on the brochure they listed a workshop in the Alexander Technique. But it had happened 2 weeks before. So I said, oh, well, that's interesting. I better get on the mailing list, see if they do it again. And they did about 4 months later. And I do believe probably in the one before, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, and Patrick McDonald was probably on that workshop, because it was around December, and this was January when Watts came to town. So in April, I went to this other workshop out in Pasadena, and there were 3 teachers running it. Frank Ottewell from San Francisco, Judith Stransky from here in Santa Monica. Wow, a teacher here in Santa Monica. And Shoshana Kamenetz from London. And I didn't work with Judith. I worked with Frank my first term. And then the second half of the day, I went upstairs and worked for an hour or so with Shoshana. And was really tuned in, fascinated by what was going on in the work. Although I came out of it after an hour, it seemed like an hour in the monkey position. Yeah. With the legs like rubber. Yeah. Even though I've been doing a lot of exercising, climbing mountains, running, and stuff like that.
So another key to my recovery was taking writing classes with Terry Silverman. This is Terry Silverman here. She's an amazing teacher. Here we go.
All right. So my mother says to me, why don't you go on vacation? It's a reasonable inquiry. That's what people do. They go and they have fun. I am aware of the concept. However, when I think about going on vacation, I think about earthquakes. Because what if there's an earthquake while I'm gone? And then if everything is not destroyed, they will loot. And what about terrorist attacks? And I have a dog, so she has never been without me for 9 years. She may get separation anxiety. She will stop eating and she will die. So how can I go on vacation? And my mother says, I know you love your work, but it can't be just that. I do love my work. I don't know if I know how to take a break. And so I start considering it. Right when Congress is having all the bills put through that are going to wipe out my health care. So how can I spend one dime on anything when I'm going to need every cent I have to pay for my health insurance? And I do not have a pension. So that is another reason.
So I started taking writing classes with this woman, Terry Silverman, in 2009. I just love her. She's a great teacher here in Los Angeles. I took a class with her on how to create a one-man play. It was a 6-month class. And as a fun writing exercise one day, circa in 2011, thought I'm going to write about what I find erotic. And so I wrote like a 5-page essay on what I find erotic, and I read it to my therapist, and he said, that sounds like eroticized rage. And I never heard that term before, but I went home and Googled it and learned that it was a symptom of sex addiction. And so that's what started me on my 12-step journey. That, I need to address this. So it was a writing assignment for Terry Silverman that got me on my path to recovery.
And my mother says, Terry, don't wait. You don't know what's going to happen. Have some fun. My mother, because of her health conditions, can no longer travel. And so when I interview a confident, experienced, affordable pet sitter, I decide. And I listen to the fantasy that I've had for the whole year. I had a hard year the year before. I was in the kind of car accident where the fire, the ambulance, and the police come and they block off the street. And it's the kind of accident where you look hoping that that never happens to you. It did. And as soon as I healed, I broke my shoulder. So it was not a safe, happy, fun year. And all I wanted the whole year while I'm doing physical therapy and trying to heal is, if only I could sip tea served by English people, because it tastes so much better when English people serve English tea, but be sipping it in England. So I decide to face my vacation fear and go to my favorite place in the world. I've wanted to be English my whole life. I'm a huge Anglophile. Mary Poppins, Julie Andrews, Downton Abbey, Dame Judi Dench, the Beatles. I was the only one in my Bluebird troupe that could do an English accent. So here I come. All right, very good. Thank you. And so on the plane, when the turbulence is very bad, I look around to see, is this what destiny looks like? Are me and my...
So I took this class with Terry Silverman on how to create a one-man play, and my initial effort was not very good, kind of cringe.
Mashiach, Mashiach! We want Mashiach now. We want the Messiah now. That's one of the tunes that the synagogue I go to. We want, the ultimate redemption. We want the Messiah to come now because this is such a flawed, painful, and broken world. And we're still waiting for these broken pieces of our lives and of this world to be fixed. So I belong to an Orthodox synagogue and believe that the Messiah will eventually come as one of the 13 foundational beliefs according to Judaism. And as Maimonides, the 13th century philosopher, says, even though he tarries, yet will we wait for him. Now, I just wish that I had a partner to do the Mashiach dance with, every Friday night. Mashiach.
So on the way to this one-man play, this was the Sunday afternoon in February of 2013, when the San Francisco 49ers played the Baltimore Ravens in the Super Bowl. And so on my way to the debut performance of my one-man play, my van broke down on the 405 freeway. Luckily, it broke down just as I crested the top going into the San Fernando Valley. So I was able to coast to a stop and call for a tow. And some Israeli tow truck driver showed up after about 40 minutes, and I had him drop me off at the theater. On the way to him dropping off my van at the mechanic, and my van turned out to be dead. That was it. After driving that Dodge B350 for about 18 years. It got 10 miles to the gallon. I bought it in 1995, wanting something that I could sleep in if need be. So it died on my way to the theater. But because I always leave very early, I'd left like 3 hours before my performance was due to start. So I still arrived at the theater about 90 minutes before my show was due to start. But there was this 40-minute delay in the Super Bowl because of an electrical problem. So only 3 people showed up to my performance of my one-man play. The theater was not very happy about that. And this is really cringe.
Because I can't dance. I was raised a Seventh-day Adventist. Seventh-day Adventists don't dance. And I need someone to show me the moves. But she hasn't shown up yet. But I'm looking for someone who keeps the Sabbath, who keeps the Jewish dietary laws, keeps kosher. And it'd be nice if her parents liked me. And it would be nice if they even adored me and said, hey, we can stay with them until, she finishes high school. And I finished my book on eroticized rage. I'm just looking for someone to support me, while I finish my book on eroticized rage. And I have these props in my pants, and they're falling right down my pants. I should have worn a belt. Oy vey. But I'm grateful for the Orthodox Jewish community because they help out those who are less needy. And so they've been able to help out needy Jews such as myself get the psychological help that I so badly need and the antipsychotic medication. So Moses received the Torah at Mount Sinai, and I received my Thorazine at Cedar Sinai. So when God created the world, he chose the Jews to be the master race of humanity. But it quickly became apparent that this would have very cruel consequences for the less intelligent Goyim of creation. So God gave the Jews a written Torah and an oral Torah to fence them in so that they wouldn't harm the gentle Gentiles. And so Jews such as myself who live within the Torah corral, fenced in by both the written Torah and the oral Torah, 3,000 years of Jewish tradition and Jewish laws. Now, we can never hurt you Gentiles. So just know that if you ever get really mad at the Jews, that I live within the Torah corral. Now, I can never hurt you. This play is taking place within the Torah corral. So everything that happens here tonight is safe, it's beneficial, it's therapeutic, it's divinely ordained. So you're safe. I just want to create safety because sometimes people get a little freaked out by the title eroticized rage. It sounds really unsafe. So on the first day of Hanukkah, my good boss gave to me one big screen, 32 inches, 1080 pixels, and a partridge in a pear tree. So for the first time in my life, I got a big screen. And I'm so excited. It's high definition. I've never had high def before, but it's kind of haunting me because I just want to put porn on it. What else do you do with a big high def screen? I bet pornography looks amazing in high def. I've never seen porn in high def, but I've been off the porn for about 2 years now. So each day I'm staying sober in this respect. But it's just kind of sitting there on my desk, 32 inches, just taunting me. I watch my Torah lectures in high def, but it's just not quite so exciting. I watch Netflix in high def, and that's cool because I can be watching some French drama, and it's very high-minded. It's about schizophrenia. And before I can change the channel or something, some woman would just whip her top off. And I'm totally innocent. I'm not, scrolling and searching and surfing for topless women. It just popped up on my Netflix. I'm an innocent man. I can just enjoy the sight and go on with my life. Boy. I'm sure glad there are no really hot female rabbis, because like if I was watching my high def, Torah talks, it would be really taunting, because I'd be thinking like, when's she going to get naked? That's just what happens when you watch so much pornography. It morally desensitizes you. I love the porn because when you're watching the porn, you feel like you're swept away to a better world. Like this world that we live in, it's so broken and it's so painful, and life is so frustrating, and your dreams get dashed, and interpersonal relationships are so difficult. I mean, people are so complicated, and intimacy is so challenging that it's really nice to like just escape into the world of porn where everything is like a dream. And for me, it's like catching a wave. It's like you start watching the porn and like time can fly by and you're just catching that wave. I love to body surf, and the wave peaks and then it crashes, and if you're riding it just right, it'll just carry you along to shore and you just ricochet it along, and you're not in control. The wave's in control. And it feels the same way with pornography or with falling in love. It feels like a power greater than yourself has taken control of your life. I remember in 2006, I was in the San Fernando Valley on the set of Lesbian Swole Fest 7. And it was at the home of Cytherea, the goddess of gush. And this movie starred Olivia Saint and Karma, and I met this really nice girl on the set of Lesbian Swole Fest 7, and her name's Haley Rivers. And we had such a great conversation. I was writing a blog at the time on the porn industry, and I really hit it off with Haley. And after she left the industry a few months later, I started going out with Haley on a regular basis because she loved to read books. She really was a nice, sweet girl, and she got kind of chewed up by her few months in the pornography industry, but now she was out of it. And when I would get together with Haley, it was like catching that wave again. Like the sex was amazing, and she was such a sweet person, and she knew all these techniques and tricks, and it was just like mind-blowing sex, and I was just so hooked. But then a funny thing happened. The more I had sex with her, the more emotionally I fell for her. And then the more emotionally I fell for her, the more I loved her, the more her past in pornography bothered me. Like when we started out just having dinner and having sex, it didn't bother me. But now, however much I'd like to think of myself as like cool, I get emotionally involved when I have sex with someone. And as the weeks went by, like her past just started eating at me. And eventually I sought out a friend, and I described to him this one scene that she'd done. And my friend said, well, at least you know she isn't racist. Haley had always told me, there's one thing you can never do. You can never remind me of one particular scene that she did. She did it with an agent, and he required all the girls that he represented to have sex with him. And he was like an old fat guy, and she just found it so icky that she said, never remind me of that, or I'll just burst into tears. And as the weeks went by that I was seeing Haley, and this was eating away at me, like the things she'd done on camera, and one day I blogged about it, like the scene that she did with the CD agent, and that was it. She just like cut me off, and there was no more riding the wave of Haley anymore. My last girlfriend was the love of my life. And she would wear high heels. I love high heels on women. She'd wear business suits because she was an executive. And she was a little bit transgressive like me. And we would have sex everywhere. And I remember one weekend we went to the beach, and we stayed by the beach. And we went out into the water, and we kind of swam offshore out where we could not touch anymore. And I went to embrace her. And she got scared because there was this undertow. And so she like broke away from me and paddled off to shore like in a panic and got to shore. And so I was out there in the waves alone, and I just saw this big wave coming. out on the horizon, and I positioned myself just right. And as it started getting closer and closer towards me, I was just paddling furiously, and I caught the wave just perfectly right at the top, and it crashed. It took me right into shore, and she's just watching me. And she said that when I emerged out of the waves, I looked like a Greek god. One of my great memories. So just before Christmas, I marched up to this guy on my floor where I work. And we have this really frank, open relationship where we can just say anything to each other. And so I said, hey, my rabbis told me I can't wish you a Merry Christmas because we Jews, we can't legitimate Christianity. This guy got so upset. Like, he accused me of being a racist and a bigot. And for the next week or two, he'd march up and down the floor telling people about the bigoted, racist thing that I said. It just totally exploded in my face because you don't want tension and conflict at work. And so I talked about this in therapy. And I explained this to my therapist, and I said, I've got to admit, I was feeling a little bit of hostility, and I just kind of wanted to vent. But this guy, he was not the real target for my hostility. I think it's probably really aimed at my preacher daddy. And my father, the Seventh-day Adventist minister, the Christian evangelist. And I did this a lot. I kind of just vent on people, this free-floating anxiety, anger, rage that I have. And it just comes out at all these inopportune times. And it's holding me back in my work life. It's holding me back in my personal life. It's holding me back in period. And my therapist said, well, why don't you express your rage directly at your father? And that was really daunting to me because I've never expressed rage at my father in my life. In fact, I've never yelled at anyone since 8th grade when some kid grounded out, denying me an at-bat, and I started calling him a faggot. That was our term of derision in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade when I came to America. And I was so embarrassed by what I did because the woman that I was staying with at the time, because my parents were gone, she was right there and I didn't know it. And at home, I was always this nice, gentle kid. And then suddenly I was screaming faggot. And she was right there seeing this. And this was not a side of myself that I wanted to show to the adults. And so I resolved, okay, never again, don't lose my temper. Really bad things come out. But when I don't express my rage directly, I kind of express it indirectly through blogging. I have this rage at anyone who abuses religious authority, or I think they're abusing religious authority. I just find myself, going after them very aggressively. Now, frequently that's doing good. I'm exposing child molesters and predatory rabbis and rabbis who take advantage of innocent people. But sometimes I go after people whose cases are more complicated. And my rage is really, really at my dad. So my therapist said, well, next week, let's try something. You willing to try this? Let's have an empty chair. And you can just yell at your dad. I said, okay, I'll try it. The prospect's kind of frightening because my dad to me is like God. I have the same relationship with my father that I have with God, which is pretty much none at all. Like my father, when I was growing up, he just seemed all-powerful and all-knowing, and when I would commit sins, he'd find them out and he'd punish me. My father would, like God, reward and punish. I've never had open conflict with him in my life. We've always had a kind of amiable relationship, though it's not been close, and he's certainly been devastated by many of the things I've done since I became an adult, but he's not yelled at me because he knew it wouldn't do any good. I was an adult. So I come back to therapy the next week, prepared to confront this empty chair, and my therapist changes her mind. She says, tell me about all the ways that you want to emulate your father. Tell me about all the ways that you like your father. So I said, well, I admire that he's a scholar. I admire that he dedicates his life to learning. I admire that he dedicates his life to God. I admire that he's a really righteous guy. Like, I've never seen my father do anything unethical. My father's like lived his life on a very high moral plane. And I respect that because supposedly I'm all about God-based ethics as a convert to Orthodox Judaism. Like, this is what I should be about. And my father is a more ethical person than me. So I never got to yell at him. She kind of shelved that idea. So I've been thinking in the past few weeks, what would I yell at him about? And I'm not capable of yelling at him. And I just spent all day today watching videos of my father. There are like 100 videos of Desmond Ford on YouTube. And I'm watching this very eloquent, moving, charismatic, powerful preacher. When you believe that you're doing God's work, it gives you real power. And my father has just tapped into that power. And so I'm looking at this preacher man, and I'm looking at him mesmerize hundreds of people. And I'm watching him do an altar call. And let me see if I can imitate my father. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Sinner, if you want to get right with God tonight, if you want to repair your broken relationship with the Almighty, the creator of heaven and earth, don't try to climb your way to heaven up the shaking sides of Mount Sinai. Salvation is a free gift, given freely to all who will accept it. All you have to do is reach out your hand and accept the free gift of salvation. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but shall have everlasting life. So if you would like to commit your life to God tonight, if you would like to recommit your life to the Almighty, I'd like you to come on down and to say a prayer with me. There are people here who will pray with you. Lord, we know how much we need you. We know that you sent your Son to die on a cross so that we could be forgiven our sins. We know that you want us to have joy everlasting. Lord, we know that you want us to be with you in heaven. We know that you sent your Son to die on our behalf. And Lord, we are so grateful and we thank you tonight. Amen. So I'm watching my dad and he's just so very moving. I'm not a Christian. I converted to Judaism, so I'm not swayed by the arguments he makes, but I'm just impressed by the eloquence with which he delivers them, particularly as I have to get up on stage tonight for the first time and debut my show, Eroticized Rage. I'm like trying to pick up some public speaking tips from my father. And I have a really hard time learning from my father because he's my father and I have all these blocks to relating to him. But I'm looking at him and there's just so much like worry and unhappiness and tension and pain. It's just like flowing out of his pores and it's just like written across his face. And he's speaking, the only people who move the world are those who the world cannot move. The people who know the unspeakable joy of the apostolic gospel. And I'm seeing this man speaking about, joy everlasting, true happiness, peace of mind. And I just see the worry and the tension and the fear and the resentment and the disappointment just like written across his face. And I'm thinking like, what do these people not get? There are like thousands of people who are absolutely mesmerized by my father's preaching. But I look at his preaching and I see this like very hurt, wounded man who's like filled with worry and concern. And then I think I realize that people relate to that. He's like the wounded healer, to quote my writing teacher, Terry Silverman. And so people relate to someone who's like so broken and so hurting, who has embraced God and this evangelical Christian ministry and is trying to show people the way to a better life, even though he can't get very far towards it himself. So Monday night in therapy, I'm just like ripping my nails to shreds. I like to dig in with my right thumbnail into my fingers and just like dig into the nail and just start tearing it when I feel just too much tension. It's a bad habit that I gave up in high school, but it was coming back to me Monday night when I started talking about my father. I've had about 8 years of psychotherapy, and for 7.5 of those years, I didn't really want to talk about my upbringing. I thought I should concentrate on what's going on now. I wanted to talk about all the girls I was banging and all the synagogues that were rejecting me, and my very tumultuous life, kind of careening from crisis to crisis. But last few months, I thought maybe I should go back and I kind of re-examine my relationship with my parents, because I can see how it's poisoning my life today. So I'm like sitting there kind of ripping my nails, and my therapist says to me, okay, stop. I just want you to sit there and kind of just take this in for a minute. Your father chose his career over you. Your father chose his religion over you. Your father chose looking after his dying wife over you. Your father chose your stepmother over you. Your father chose his work over your best interests. Your father sometimes pawned you off to other people to take care of because he didn't want to take care of you because he was so committed to his work. How does that make you feel? And I said, well, I feel some tinglings of anger, but only tinglings. And she says, well, that's good. At least you're getting in touch with something. I said, but I don't really feel much because my father's dead to me. And I couldn't believe I said that. I just said that my father was dead to me, and he was like a totally righteous man. Like, he never did anything like really bad to me. Like, he lived his life by very high moral principles, and I find myself saying he's dead to me. And my therapist says, so your real life father is too upsetting and painful for you to deal with, so you have to make him dead to have him in your life at all? And so, what would I feel if I was standing there in the cemetery watching my father's casket lowered into the ground? My father's 84 years old. He just turned 84 on Saturday. And this is a terrible sounding thing to say, but I feel relief. I just feel relief. And then I start thinking about two friends of mine who died, and my first instinct upon hearing the news was relief. Now, they were good friends of mine, Kathy Seid and Mark Kramer, two writers. But they were very difficult, challenging people. And Kathy had had this long, long illness. But they were important to me, but I felt relief when I found out they had died. And so I was trying to figure out, why would I feel relief when I hear that my father dies? And then I started thinking, well, I feel relief because I don't have to try to work on my relationship with him anymore. It's like the easy way out. It's like the coward's way out. It's like, oh, it's gone. I don't have to deal. And then I kept going deeper, and I realized I just don't want to look in that mirror anymore. Because my father is so much like me. He is so alike. And it's like I'm looking at so much of myself when I look at my father, and I just want to avoid that. I guess I kind of want to. It's not so much my father that I'm fleeing from. It's myself, or parts of myself that I haven't fully dealt with or reconciled. So this is the only thing I have left of my mother, really. It's her book, Fireside Stories. It's a book of Christian inspirational stories for children. And on my first birthday, my mother started vomiting very severely, and she was diagnosed with terminal bone cancer. So over the next 3 years, she kind of wasted away to about 60 pounds on a 5-foot body, and she died very painfully just before I turned 4. And I only have one memory of my mother Gwen, and that's her preparing and serving me scrambled eggs. And my sitting at the table, and she kind of putting these yellow eggs on a plate before me, and they were delicious. And for all of my childhood, scrambled eggs was my favorite food in the world, until I got to UCLA. And I got some bad scrambled eggs in the Reba Hall cafeteria, and it just like totally ended that that favorite food. But I kind of poured through this book, like looking for messages from my mother. Now, I think that she would have like left me a note or something to read when I turned 18. My mother did care for me very deeply. She had this conviction when she was carrying me in her belly. She would tell my dad, this one's going to do something special for God. And I got told that a lot as a kid, and I became convinced that I was a man of destiny. But, I read through this book, and it's just like pedestrian children's stories. It's like if there was some great writing in here, I could like do something with it, but it's all about Christ and Christianity and Christian inspiration, and I'm now an Orthodox Jew, and so I go through this book and I can't find anything. It's just this old 44-year-old book, came out in 1968 when I was 2 years old. There's one story, the first story, that kind of speaks to me a little bit. It's called Wan Ping the Unwanted. Wan Ping was this little girl who grew up in Taiwan, and her family didn't want her because they had too many girls already. So they sold her into slavery. And she worked as a slave, and eventually she was adopted by these Christian missionaries who got her educated, and she got a degree as a nurse, and she married a doctor. And then she went back to the mountains where she grew up. And so the kid that nobody wanted became the nurse that everyone loved. And I dig the koala bear on the cover because he looks like he's found his place in the world. And the pause that refreshes. So I want to give my father's perspective. So I've been giving mine. In January 28, 1999, there was this weekly publication in Los Angeles. It was like the LA Weekly. It was a competitor to the LA Weekly. It was called New Times LA. And it had a cover story on me. And the journalist Peter Gilstrap called out my father. And I quote, "You need to understand Luke's background to understand the foolish things that he's doing," offers Dr. Ford. "He was separated from his mother when she was declared to be a terminal patient of cancer when he was 12 months old. So he had a series of nannies for a number of years. Each time he'd get his affection wrapped around one, things would change. He'd have another person looking after him. This went on until I remarried. By that time, he was something of a psychological case, as he'd been deprived over and over. Brutal honesty seems to run in the Ford family." Quotes, "He is narcissistic. He's just not acting sanely because he's not well. And the doctor has an explanation for Luke's embracing of Judaism as well. He wants to be someone in his own right. He's not really behaving according to the ethics of Judaism at all. It's only a front. Still, it's his son's involvement in porn that concerns the doctor the most. I'm afraid he'll be shot," he says. "He's doing damage to people who have no scruples." When informed of this conversation, the son's only comment is, "Oh, my poor father." Now I just want to offer a brief objective perspective, I believe, on my father and I from a Seventh-day Adventist Bible scholar. He writes to me, "Your father knows too much for me to tell him anything, including about you. It will never happen. You write in the style of your father. Like him, you tie together long quotes with rather poor segues. Knowing too much, summarizing too fast, summing up too quickly is a weakness he has. It is a way that you and he are terrifically alike. You enjoy controversy and driving people nuts way too much. Part of what makes you ill at ease is this approach toward the outside world as the enemy to be debunked. And then Hollywood screenwriter Robert J. Averick, who wrote the movie Body Double, which is about the porn industry. He also wrote A Stranger Among Us, which is about Orthodox Judaism. He wrote the foreword to my 2004 book, Yesterday's News, Tomorrow Inside American Journalism. He writes, "Betrayal fascinates Luke Ford. It is his life. Luke betrayed his father, a prominent Seventh-day Adventist minister, when Luke converted to Judaism. Luke betrayed his second father when he sacrificed his friendship with Dennis Prager to work on an unauthorized biography of his hero. And Luke betrayed Judaism when he became LukeFord.com, the preeminent journalist covering LA's sordid, mob-infested porn industry. Luke betrayed his Orthodox synagogue when he lied about his work and told the rabbi that he was a freelance journalist who writes about crime for a Japanese magazine." I did kind of write about crime a couple of times for a Japanese magazine, but it wasn't really my main thing. So when my mother died, my dad was chased by all these women because he was like a big shot in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And some of these women would tell him, like, I had a vision that we were to get married. My father would say, well, if that was true, I would have had a vision too, and I haven't. But my mother, Gwen, had told my father that he should marry his secretary, Jill. And so the church also pressured my father to get married because it was a distraction to him to have all these women chasing him. My father was the chair of the religion department at Avondale College, which is a Seventh-day Adventist college 2 hours drive north of Sydney. So a few months after my mother died, my dad married his secretary, Jill. And I regard her as my mother because that's what she's been since I was 4 years old. And I would cling to my mother, Jill, when I was a little boy, and I'd say, I'm a lucky boy. Most boys have only one mother. I've had lots, but I don't want any more. There was a problem, though. When my mother got married, she went on the pill, and the pill just did really wacky things with her hormones. So for the next 14 years, she was insane 2 weeks out of the month. Like the 2 weeks before her period, she just had the worst premenstrual syndrome. She was like suicidal. You know, she was desperate. She was angry. She was depressed. She wouldn't come out of her room. Nobody knew what to do, and that began like a long journey to all these doctors and psychiatrists. My father had this very loving marriage in his first marriage, but then his wife died. But then he married a very nice woman, second time, Jill, my stepmother. But the pill triggered something, and she was just insane 2 weeks of the month, and she would slap me. And I'd go flying, and my dad would try to protect me the best he could, but he was getting his second PhD, did the first one in rhetoric, this one was in New Testament studies, and my home was just a horror show for 14 years until my mother got the help that she needed. And so since I've been 18, my mother's been sane, meaning Jill, 4 weeks out of the month. You know, she's been great once she got hormone replacement therapy that just like really did the trick for her. But for the 14 years that I was growing up, it was just horrific. And because of the horror, I never really saw any love between my father and my stepmother. There may well have been love there. I'm not claiming that I'm the objective source of all wisdom. There are many different types of relationships. Some relationships are based around causes, and my father had his evangelical Christian cause of saving souls for Jesus and showing people the way to heaven. And my mother assisted him with that, meaning Jill. She assisted him with his learning German and French so that he could get his second PhD. She wrote a book that became very well known in Seventh-day Adventist circles, but I doubt you've heard of it. It's called The Soteriological Implications of the Human Nature of Christ. Does anyone here know what soteriological means? It has to do with the nature of salvation. So it means, what does it mean for your salvation that Jesus Christ had a human nature? So she's a very smart woman. She's a great writer, but she was nuts 2 weeks out of the month. And so I grew up with all these different mothers, and I grew up with what is called the intermittent attachment to the mother. That means some days the mother is attuned to you. Like if you're upset, they notice you're upset. If you're happy, they notice you're happy. But other days she was just raging, out of control, ignoring me or slapping me, or it was just horrific. So I never knew when I went to my mother, meaning the various mothers who looked after me in my first few years, and then my stepmother, I never knew whether I'd get a slap or a hug. And so people who grow up with this intermittent style of attaching, they regard the outside world as a scary place. And they tend to carry on this very same attachment style into their lives. And I've had that too. I've had that kind of fear of genuine bonding with another person. People who get this intermittent mothering, they tend to become either workaholics or addicts. And they're very anxious people because home was not a safe place. My father got this very same mothering style. My father's mother was a sex and love addict. She would drag my father and his brother around Australia as she chased various men, as she chased various romantic sexual highs. And my dad's father, he was emotionally unavailable. He wasn't capable of dealing with emotions. So it's so interesting that my father and I both had the same kind of parenting. Like my father's not really emotionally available because he was never taught how to deal with emotions, so he avoids emotions. And people who grow up with a father who's not emotionally available, they tend to feel worthless because the father is never able to bond with them because the father's not emotionally available. So I'm kind of like carrying on my father's life. Has anyone in here read the book Passionate Marriage or heard of the book Passionate Marriage? It's about something called differentiation. Differentiation means it's your ability to hold on to what's important to you while you try to stay in relationship with the people who are important to you. It's very easy to just pursue what you want and say, screw everyone else. And it's very easy to sacrifice what you want for the sake of staying in attachment to the people who are important to you. But true maturity is trying to stay in relationship to the people who are important to you while also staying true to what's important to you. And so what happens when the anxiety starts welling up, a person with a low level of differentiation will either split from the relationship, any type of relationship, they will get out of it, or they will surrender what's important to them. So levels of differentiation, which are really levels of emotional maturity, tend to run pretty much the same throughout families. So if you think you're so much more mature than your father or your sibling, you're probably deluded. You're all probably in the same boat. We can only have relationships with people who are on the same level of emotional maturity as we are. So if you're dating someone and you think, oh, she's an alcoholic, she's a horror show, she's this and she's that, and you're going around telling everyone about how horrible your girlfriend, now ex-girlfriend is, she's a mirror back to you. You can only spend time, intimate time with people who are on that same level of maturity. And the level of differentiation tends to stay pretty constant from generation to generation. So the things that I struggle with are very similar to the things my father struggles with, to very similar things to his father and his father. And it's very difficult to grow your level of differentiation. It takes very hard work, a lot of therapy, a lot of really hard work to be able to stay true to your values. Because, like with my father, I just want to flee and do my own thing. Instead of like working on trying to relate to him or relate to anyone who I find troubling, I have this low level of emotional maturity. I just like cut and run. And so it makes for a very lonely life. I was suicidal much of my youth. And I allowed myself to think about suicide because I thought it was the one thing that I could do that would cause my parents the most pain. And it's not like they were terrible parents. Like
totally did the best they could. You know, they raised me with God and religion and a community. But I just had so much rage and anger, and they were the closest people to me. So I wanted to hurt them. And I thought if I kill myself, that would just be devastating to them. And it'd be devastating to my teacher who treated me badly. And it'd be devastating to those other kids. I remember Gavin Brown in 2nd grade. He did not invite me to his birthday party. And I still remember that. I was so keen. And it was because I was an obnoxious kid. It wasn't because I was this righteous person, a figure of light. It was because I was obnoxious. And I became fascinated with fire. I learned how you'd wrap matches in tinder, and then you'd like step on them, and it'd make a boom if you did it right. And then, like, forest fires were the worst thing where I grew up. We were in the country, and I heard a lot of things about the horror of forest fires and setting fires. And when I was about 7 or 8, I took some matches and I went into the field of dry grass outside our home, and I lit it alight, and then I ran off. Luckily, the neighbors saw it, saw the fire, and came out and put it out. And when I told my best friend Wayne what I'd done, he said, you know, I'm going to tell on you if you ever do that again. So I didn't do it again. But I did play with matches inside the home and burnt a hole in the tablecloth and got a really good spanking from my father for doing that. I remember I'd get the mini sermon first, and then I'd have to get down on my knees, then I'd have to pull down my pants. I'd be like this, and my dad would say, I'm going to hit you longer and harder if you cry. And now I'm going to have to hit you so hard that you're not going to be able to sit down for a week. And then he'd just like wail away. Which I thoroughly deserved because I was a menace. I was playing with matches inside the house. I played with matches outside the house. And I only got a handful, maybe 4 spankings from my dad, but they're very indelibly etched in my mind. So, like, I understand people who light fires, and I understand people who like create computer viruses, because we want to make the outside world match the anger and rage and fire that we feel inside. And we want to feel powerful. Like when you light a fire, you're affecting lives. You could affect hundreds of lives. You're kind of deciding who will live, who will die. And it's like this sick rush of power and significance. You want to feel important. You feel insignificant. You feel horrible about yourself. And, you know, people who are unable to connect with others are going to feel horrible about themselves. And so you just kind of lash out. And so I understand Palestinian suicide bombers. If I'd been brought up in the occupied territories or the Gaza Strip, you know, I might well have become a Palestinian suicide bomber because they promise you that you'll be cool. You tie on bombs and blow yourself up. And so it's like, wow, I'll be cool, and I'll get virgins in heaven, and my family will be given, like, honor in the community. Like, I'm really susceptible to cults. Like, anyone who wants to, like, embrace me, take me in and say, yay, Luke, no, I'll give them everything. I found a way out of my misery. I remember one day in 4th grade, I'm at the home of my best friend Wayne. And he goes into the trailer of his oldest brother Brian and comes out with these girly magazines. And we take them out back, and we lie down among the tobacco leaves, and we just open them up, and it was just so magnificent. It was like totally naked women, and they were like so beautiful. Like all the women I knew, they hid the good stuff. But now the good stuff was out there. I mean, there was breasts, and there was like unbelievable pubic hair, and I just loved the way they would pose. Like the look, like these girls truly understood me. I mean, I could see on their faces they understood me. You know, they'd pout a little bit, or they'd wink, or they'd stick one finger like this, or they kind of lean over and make their breast really big, or they just kind of lie back and look all passive, or they just like slide a finger in and they look really stirred up, or they'd be closing their eyes imagining the ecstasy that they could have if I jumped on top of them right then. And, you know, my pulse was racing and my blood was circulating and I was flushing bright red. And, like, this was awesome. This was, like, the greatest thing in the world. Because I'd seen, even though I lived in a Seventh-day Adventist community, only about 25% of the community was Seventh-day Adventist. Even though I had no non-Adventist friends, there were non-Adventists in the community, and I would see them swimming in the creek down below our house, and the girls would wear bikinis. And now I got to see, like, what was underneath the bikinis. Like, in real life, I kind of see things get wedged up inside of them, but now there were no more secrets. I had eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I loved it. Like, and I studied these magazines the way my dad studied the sacred text. My dad loved the Bible. He wanted to know, you know, God's will for our lives. Now, I just wanted to know about girls, because girls in my school they had no interest in sex. It was weird. Like, I entered school in second grade, so I was age 8, because the founding prophet of my church, Ellen G. White, said that you should hold kids until later before you send them to school. So for my first few years, I was like wandering in the bush outside of our home, and with a tomahawk, and I'd like chop down trees, and I'd tell myself stories that I was a great man, like I was a general leading troops into battle. I was leading settlers, into the west and watching out for the Indians, and I knew I'd make a great general or leader because I had no feelings. I knew I could be absolutely ruthless. I'd just sit there on a log with my tomahawk, and I'd just tell myself stories and lose myself in fantasy. But around age 8 or 9, my fantasy started changing. It wasn't quite so political and military anymore. It started getting really sexual. But the girls weren't interested, so what to do? And many of my classmates started buggering each other. Like, they'd go into the dunny, which is Australian for the outside toilet. Many Australians then had toilets outside, and sometimes snakes would live in there, and you'd sit on the dunny and a snake would rise up and bite you on the ass. And so some of my friends would go into the dunnies and they'd bugger each other. They'd also have sex with animals, because we're in a rural community. And there was this one popular guy who was a grade above me. And I remember we went out. I stole some money from my parents, and I bought lots of candy, and we went for a long walk, out into the bush, and no one was around. And I knew he was having sex, and I was really curious. And so he said he'd have sex with me. So we kind of went off the road into these bushes, and I said, "Well, you pull down your pants, and I'll penetrate you." And then I got chicken at the last moment. And then I said, "Well, let's swap." And then I pulled down my pants, and then I got chicken at the last moment. It's I just didn't quite cross over. Like I said, no animals. I'm really horny, but I'm not going to have sex with any animals. And I said, I'm not going to have any sex with any boys. But no animals, no boys. I have very high standards. Fifth grade, first time that a girl pays attention to me. There's this chubby girl in my class, and she really likes me. And I don't know what to do, so I take tacks, and I put them, the sharp side up, I put them on her chair. And she comes over and sits down and yelps, and there's blood, and she's in pain, and everyone knew what I did. And I was kind of frightened by what I'd done. I've never done it again since. I'm kind of righteous like my dad. I no longer put tacks on people's chairs. And then another time she got a little too close to me, so I started kicking her. And she started crying. And she said to me through her tears, "One day you will know what it's like to love someone who kicks you." She was right. I think she cursed me. My father was a very controversial Christian evangelist and theologian, unlike his mild-mannered son. And so the Seventh-day Adventist Church thought that if they transferred him from the comparatively small pond of Australian Adventism to the United States, that he wouldn't cause so much trouble. So in May of 1977, it's like halfway through 5th grade, we moved to Pacific Union College in the Napa Valley, a Seventh-day Adventist college. And I entered 6th grade that September. And it was awesome because there were no school uniforms in America. And the teachers didn't hit you. Like, the teachers used to wail on me. They'd like break rulers over my hand. They'd hit me so hard in Australia. Also, in Australia, none of the kids wore deodorant. But in America, like, people smell great. It's like amazing. I love America. And in Australia, people are really brutally honest in the things they say. But in America, people were like really nice. And they were much more psychological. And so everyone started saying that I was insecure. Like, no one in Australia had called me insecure. And I was just as insecure in Australia as I was when I came to America. But America had that therapeutic language. And makeup. In Australian private school, girls are forbidden from wearing makeup. But in America, the girls wore makeup. Best of all, they used lip smacker. I just love lip smacker. They would just glide on this lip gloss. Came in strawberry, vanilla, just like these amazing flavors. And they just like swipe it across their lips, and their lips would become shiny, and they'd smell of fruit. And the most beautiful girl in the class kind of looked like Jacqueline Smith from Charlie's Angels. Kind of like a combination of Jacqueline Smith, Kate Jackson, and Jane Seymour. That great brunette beauty. And I'm new in the school, and what's awesome about this is that my place in the social pecking order isn't set yet. They don't know I'm a loser. Because there's not Facebook, there's not the internet yet. So what do I mean by social pecking order? What do I mean by social status? It's, do people want to be around you? Like, do people come to your one-man place? So if no one wants to be around you, you might as well die. I mean, social isolation is like just another word for death. But if you walk into a room and people want to talk to you and be around you, that's the most amazing thing ever. So they don't know I'm a loser. And Cindy doesn't know I'm a loser. Kate Jackson Beauty. So early on in 6th grade, she walks by my desk and she drops a note. No one's ever dropped a note on my desk before. And my heart starts thumping, thumping, thumping. And this is the greatest moment of my life. This is the absolute high of my life, because the most beautiful girl has dropped a note on my desk, and the note says, "Will you go with me?" And I am flooded. I'm just flooded with emotion, because it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. But like a car that's flooded won't start, I didn't know what to do, so I didn't do anything. And then the next day I just started teasing her, unmercifully, publicly, humiliating her. And I've got to understand why I did this, because like never again has the most beautiful girl in the class wanted to go with me. And I think it was because I just had no model for love. Like, my parents had this horror show due to my stepmother's illness and my dad's neglectful upbringing. And so I didn't know how to relate to people. Like, my dad was a martyr. Like, he deliberately martyred himself for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's what he gave everything for, and he kind of let everyone know that he gave everything for the gospel, and he was a martyr. And the whole ethos, the whole central story of Christianity is that God came to earth, took human form, and martyred himself on a cross to save humanity from sin. I remember one of the first films that I saw that I remember so distinctly is the 1966 Oscar winner Man for All Seasons, which is about Sir Thomas More, who was like a martyr for his beliefs, that the king shouldn't get a divorce in England in the 16th century. So martyrdom seemed like at the very center of the religion I was raised in, and due to the neglectful upbringing that my father had. Instead of losing himself in addiction and alcoholism like his brother, he lost himself in God, which was healthier. But I had no model for dealing with emotions. My father couldn't relate to me emotionally, and my mother was like out of control emotionally, so that it was frightening. Like my dad was gone a lot of the time preaching, and so I was like the man of the house. And my stepmother would often say to me, "You've saved my bacon." Like on Friday nights, we'd kind of get into bed together. Nothing improper happened, but I just like kind of cling to her and get her to tell me stories about her life. And I mean, this carried on until I was 15. It was like emotional incest, because my dad was gone. My dad was not capable of loving my mother because she was so troubled by her illness and because of his own upbringing. So my mother loved me and I loved her. But she told me too much. It was like too much for me to handle. On the one hand, I felt proud about being the man of the house. But on the other hand, she just had so much need. She was like this whirlpool of need that it frightened me. And my dad would tell me, well, all women are like that. All women get, depressed before their periods. All women get violent before their periods. It's just how women are. You can't just like drill a hole in the watermelon to see if she's sweet. If I could just have one do-over in my life, it would be that note from Cindy Jackson. It's like I imagine, what would I say to her if I could do it over? It would be, hey, yes, I've never done this before. You're my first girl. I don't know how to do this. Can you show me? I really like you, and you'll know it was the most exciting thing that's happened to me my whole life. I adore you. But I'm kind of frightened by everything the intensity of all of this. I'm scared. Will you help me? Cindy left our community after 6th grade. I have no idea what she's doing now. I ask people on Facebook, I have no idea. I just love to know what she's doing now. So in the summer of 7th grade, I started hanging out at Pacific Union College pool, and with this kind of amiable blonde Jeannie. She's not the most beautiful girl in the class, but she's very nice. And we play these keep-away games. And so the boys against the girls, and we each have like a partner, and we kind of throw the ball back and forth and try to keep it from the other. And it's just all an excuse so that you can touch each other. But my touch is really hard. It's really, I really tackle her and dunk her under the water. And the other guys tell me, take it easy. This is just an excuse to put your arms around her. But I don't know how to touch, because most of the touch that I've received has been violence. And my father is so tense, so anxious, because he had the same sort of mothering style that I talked about. So he has so much anxiety and tension, and when you're touched by someone who's tense, it's very unpleasant. So I was relieved when I was about age 7. He said I was too old to kiss goodnight anymore. I was relieved because his touch is so unpleasant, and my father hates to be touched. And so I didn't know how to touch. In 1980, my father is kicked out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's a dispute over the heavenly sanctuary doctrine. The church said that in 1844, Jesus moved from the holy to the most holy place in the heavenly sanctuary to begin the final work of judging the saints just before coming to earth. Seventh-day Adventist, Advent means the soon coming of Jesus Christ. So they were fighting over where Jesus was traveling in 1844. That was like the theological dispute. What it really was about, in my opinion, was nothing to do with theology, but my father, like myself, grew very increasingly frustrated with the relationship between himself and the church, and this was just how he lashed out, because of his level of differentiation. He could not stay in this frustrating relationship any longer, and so he wanted to say his piece and be free, and we were now out of the church, and until this point, everybody who'd been my friend, had been a Seventh-day Adventist, and we're now out of the church, and we're kind of out in the cold world. We moved to Auburn, California, which is 45 minutes drive north of Sacramento. And my father gets a lot of press. He's like interviewed in Time Magazine, the Los Angeles Times, and he tells people that we now belong to the invisible Church of Jesus Christ. Now, this invisible Church of Jesus Christ, this mythical church, does not have a big youth program. And so we just kind of have a little gathering of disaffected ex-Adventists. And one couple that comes there is looking after about 40 retarded girls. Retarded girls just love me. I don't know. There's something about like missing a chromosome that just girls with missing chromosomes or things that are retarded, they just adore me. But I was not interested in a relationship with a retarded girl. Summer of So the good thing about when we were traveling a lot is I spent a lot of time at newsstands. And I'd see a lot of men like looking at Playboy. And I was afraid to look at Playboy. Because the one time that I looked at these girly magazines, we'd been caught by a mother. And I was so scared of what would happen to me. I didn't want to be punished. And I was so scared by my attraction for this material. And I knew it would lead me away from God. And so I swear I wouldn't look at naked photos anymore. I swore off it. But when I was in the newsstand looking at Sports Illustrated, like there'd be men around me in airports, they'd be looking at Playboy and Penthouse, and I couldn't help seeing like just a glance. I was so scared of being punished by my parents, I didn't pursue it. My parents caught me in a lot of lies, which I told to avoid getting punished, and so they gave me this punishment of every day I had to read 40 pages of some dense Christian work of apologetics. Apologetics is arguing for the truth of your particular religion. So for years, every day, 6 days a week, I'd have to read 30 to 40 pages of some dense work and then type a one-page summary of what I read to prove that I'd learned it. So I learned all the arguments for the truth of Christianity, and I emotionally just learned how much I hated it. Because it was like just stuck down my throat. I felt like it was like I was just fodder for Christ. And I just had this rage. When my father got kicked out of the church, we bought a television for the first time. Even though my television watching was limited to about an hour a day, like I saw like really beautiful women on TV, just the women reading the news or on a sitcom or on a movie or the cheerleaders and football. And now that we were out of the church, out of the Seventh-day Adventist community, like television became like the ultimate real in my life. Like this was what I wanted. This was like the fantasy. These were like the breadcrumbs leading me to a better life where I could be with sexy women like I see on TV. Because when I see those women, all my pain disappears. Like all my problems and frustrations and anger, it just goes, and all I want is to be with sexy women. Early 1982, I go with my parents back to Australia for my sister's wedding. And that's the first time that I ever pick up a Playboy on my own since fourth grade. And it's the April issue. And there's an interview with Bear Ed Koch. Not sure if I read that, but the centerfold is Linda Reese Vaughn. She's like 5 foot tall, like a real spinner. This like little girl, and she loves horse riding, and real equestrian, and has on the back of the centerfold it has these photos of her when she was a little girl, and now she's like this little sex pot. And I'm like really excited, and every time I can get away during that 2-week trip to Australia, I get to a newsstand and like go through Playboy and Penthouse, and it makes me high. I feel high. Just like I'm in a better world. It's like this is heaven. Like for my dad, heaven is being with Jesus. For me, heaven is being with Linda Reese Vaughn. Summer of 1982, I go back to Pacific Union College, stay with friends, and it's the first time I fall in love with a girl who loves me back. And her name is Rainey. She was always a grade below me when I was at Pacific Union College Elementary School from 6th through 8th grade, but I didn't really pay attention to her. But now I was working in the camp with the kids. I was like a summer camp counselor, and she worked in custodial. And she was just adorable. She wasn't theologically sophisticated, so all the things that were talked about in my home were of no interest to her. She kind of had this kind of rolling booty. She was like round. She wasn't fat, but she just had a lot of roundness to her. And I was like tall and skinny, and I just kind of felt absorbed in her attention, in her smile. She was just, she'd pull these chipmunk cheeks underwater when we're at the pool, and someday she let me put my arm around her, and I got to rub suntan lotion in her skin. And we never talked about the relationship or love or what we had, but we'd see each other every day at work, and then a couple of days a week she'd come to the pool and we'd hang out. And then came the sad day in August when my mother came to pick me up, and I never kissed her that first summer. I just said goodbye and had to go home. And even though it was 100 degrees out, it was like winter in my heart, and I'd write to Rainey. And whenever I could, I'd go back to Pacific Union College and see her spend a weekend. One Sabbath when I'm back there, she talks about she's going to a concert like Journey that night with a guy from a college guy. And I get so hurt that I stopped writing to her. I just completely cut her off. I don't tell her what I'm feeling. I don't tell her about my hurt and jealousy. I just cut her off. And then I discovered masturbation. Starting junior year of high school, my parents are gone, I'm staying with friends. I go to the secondhand bookstore, and I buy this pornographic novel. And I take it home to where I'm staying, and no one else is there, and I'm sitting in the living room, and I'm reading this novel, and I'm pressing on myself, and I'm pressing on myself, and I'm feeling this tension growing and growing and growing, and then suddenly, this sticky, gray, mucusy goo just shoots out all over my leg, all over the couch, all on the floor. It must have shot 10 feet. It was whoo! And I was scared to death. My dad, told me not to touch myself down there. Just a little bit when you wash yourself in the shower, and that's it. And, he'd warned me about this. Now, it has happened, and I am so appalled and ashamed, and all the cleaning up, there's so much of it. It's just it's everywhere. It just goes on and on and on. And I swear, I would never do this again. But the next day, I'm right back at it. And the problem is, I've never talked about it with anyone, and so I don't really know how to do it. So I don't know how I got this idea, but I'd heard if you rub two sticks together, you can create fire. So I'm just rubbing myself like this and rubbing the skin off, and I'm bleeding. It's just like I'm doing a lot of damage. It took me many weeks, till I learned a gentle stroke, alternating with the left hand and the right hand. But I'm really lucky to be here today. I almost died. So, please, kids, never try to set fire to your penis. And with any addiction, I started stealing for it. I would look in the mailboxes, in my parents' mailbox, looking for Playboys. And one day, I found the December 1982 issue of Playboy. It was my first time with a Playboy of my own that I could keep. I looked around, no one was there. I took it. and some playmate in a Christmas outfit on the cover, and it featured fiction by Paul Theroux and Arthur C. Clarke, and an article examining Reagan's nuclear war hawks. And then I took it into this broken down wood cabin, and I just went through every page. First just looking for the nudity, and then like kind of glancing at the articles, and then back to the nudity, like deciding which of these girls in this magazine I was going to have sex with. And the centerfold was Charlotte Kemp. I mean, this girl was stacked, totally stacked. She was the girlfriend of Gary Fensick, who was a Chicago Bears defensive back. And I really liked how she kind of leaned over like this and leaned back like this. And she just like closed her eyes, and she was just like in total ecstasy, anticipating what I was about to do to her. And now I had something that I could go to whenever I needed to. I could get away, and there's my very own Playboy. And I started hanging out at like liquor stores and like glancing through the new issues, because one issue was not enough. And in all but one place, they didn't give me any hassle. There was one smoke shop where after about 15 minutes, they'd get rid of me. So eventually one day, when I'm a junior, I woke up the courage and I buy my first issue of Penthouse. Like, Penthouse is my favorite, because Penthouse would be fully explicit. Like, I love the pink. Just love the pink. It just like spread open there for me. And yet it'd be shot in this beautiful, gauzy, romantic way. Like, Playboy was romantic and had really hot chicks, but it had very little pink. And Hustler had lots of pink, but it was just really gross. Like, they had like 300-pound women and a lot of black women, and I'm not really into that. And High Society was good, but again, it was gross, because like the girls would like get in there and they'd like, just like really open up that canal, and I was like, it just didn't do it for me. Like, they'd have like Annie Sprinkle, and she was chubby and not attractive, and it was gross. But Penthouse was totally where it was at, and so I developed this great collection of Penthouse magazines, in particular. And I'd walk this deserted road near my house, and one day I found like this collection of like 40 magazines, and I took them into this shed, and I just like spread them out. And like I'd spend like 5 seconds on this girl, then like 10 seconds here, and like I had just like this total orgy, like 40 different magazines. They were just all spread out before me. They were just so willing. Like, some girls were like hot to trot, and others were really haughty and disdainful, and others were just like really curious what I had packing, and they had the whole panoply of human emotion, like there. Some with the eyes closed. I understand some girls want to do it with the eyes closed, and some their eyes are wide open. It's like, whoa. And when my parents, usually I'd keep them in a old mailbox, discarded mailbox. I'd just like cover up my magazines and hide them in the woods and visit them on the way home from school. But sometimes when my parents were gone, I'd bring them all home. I'd just like spread them out on the floor, and I'd spend hours with them, and like I'd rub myself raw, like I'd nut 4 times. And I feel kind of sick afterwards, but I don't know why. January 1, 1983, Penn State wins the National College Football Championship. They beat Herschel Walker and the Georgia Bulldogs. It's a Saturday night. It's a party. The Invisible Church of Jesus Christ is having a party, a youth party. And a chubby friend of mine from church comes to the party with this cute freshman girl. So I'm a junior, this cute blonde freshman girl. And she likes me. And so the three of us go up into a loft. And after about half an hour of talking to the blonde girl, I like lean over and kiss her. Like, we're moving fast. And as I'm about to like send my tongue right down her throat, she like slows me down. And she teaches me how to kiss. She like slows me down, she takes charge, and she like glides her lips over my bottom lip and over my top lip. And she like nibbles on my lip. And then she sends her tongue over my lips and then just under my lips. And then we go at it, our tongues just like, "Rrr." And then we come back and take a breath and just look at each other. We like make out for an hour, and a chubby friend is like, "Oh, you guys, come on." But this is the first time that I really relaxed into touch. And this is where I learned to kiss. learned how fun it was. I was totally high. And it was completely recreational. I had just met this girl, half an hour, a minute before, and we've already dived into all out, making out. And I didn't really have a desire to have a relationship with her. Her body was smoking hot, but she had a fair bit of acne. But she had glossy lips, and she knew how to kiss, and she prepped me. So next summer, I go back. It's the summer of 1983, and Rainey has sent me one letter saying how hurt she is by my silence. And I run into her again, and we go for a walk. And as we cross a log over a stream in the woods at Pacific Union College, I take her in my arms, and I kiss her for the first time. This is the first time I've kissed someone who loves me, and I love her. And this is a whole different dimension of kissing. This is a whole different dimension of intimacy. And it's awesome. So we just start taking regular walks, and we'll stop and we'll make out, and then we'll catch our breath and just kind of look at each other. But I have to admit, I still had this rage and resentment that she'd gone out to a Journey concert with a college guy. So one day I take her home to where I'm staying, and I get her on my bed, and I start making out with her really hard. And I try to take her clothes off. She keeps saying, I'm not that kind of girl, I'm not that kind of girl. She won't let me. And then I don't talk to her anymore. Because I never told her how much hurt and jealousy I felt. I never explained to her, we never talked about why I stopped writing to her. I'd kind of taken out my anger on her by trying to rip her clothes off. And then when she wouldn't go along with it, I said, well, F you. I didn't say that out loud, but I just kind of dropped her. And she's never gotten married. And she still looks good. And she might have been all I needed. Because people with this intermittent style of attachment with their mother, they do tend to be womanizers. They do tend to be users of women and just going from woman to woman to woman. And that's what I was headed for. December 1983, I'm a senior in high school, and I ride the bus with Rochelle, who's this cute brunette sophomore. She's on the gymnastics team. We just kind of do this verbal gymnastics every morning in the bus. And one of our mutual friends sitting with us is Rob Stutzman, who goes on to be the political spokesman for Arnold Schwarzenegger during his campaign run. He's now a big political consultant. I'm the editor of my high school newspaper. Rob is the sports editor. And I really like Rochelle. So one Friday night, my family keeps the Sabbath, which goes from sundown Friday night to sundown Saturday night. I tell my parents I'm going to a Bible study. I go to my school, I check out a video camera, and I go along with the gymnastics team to a meet in Sacramento, and I videotape it because my school has 1 hour a day on the community access channel in Auburn, and I'm like the lead newscaster and sportscaster. I kind of run the show. So I videotape Rochelle, and on the road back, after the meet, I kind of start getting things rowdy on the bus, and the coaches like me because I have an Australian accent, and I'm charming or something. They like me, and I try to see how much I can get away with, and then I kind of start moving down the bus looking for Rochelle. Then I get her, and I just start tickling her, just very lightly at first, and she protests. Then I get more aggressive, and then she runs away from me, and so I just run down the bus after her, tickling her, and everyone's laughing and whooping it up, and I think it's okay. And I feel this is awesome because I haven't had to ask her out on a date. I haven't had to expose myself emotionally. I just cut right to the chase. This is totally the way to deal with girls. Monday I get on the bus and Rob says she doesn't like you anymore. And that was it with Rochelle. I find out that she's going to the senior prom with the center of the basketball team, and a mutual friend says to me they had massive sex after the prom. I'm just devastated. And I need to talk about it. So I start telling everyone I know that Rochelle had massive sex with Marky after the senior prom, and of course word gets back to her. I ask her to sign my yearbook. He writes, Luke, alias the rapist. I sure hope you had a fun year spreading rumors about me. So sorry I did not sink low enough to be the hill gal of the week. I guess I sort of ruined all your fun. I guess you're right, you didn't spread lies about me, sure. I had massive sex with Marky, you're right. I was definitely the one that attacked you on the bus back from championships. I'll never forget how you made me a star on cable TV. All those great tapes you took and most likely edited yourself. I am really glad you had a fun time with that collection of yours. Love, your good friend, Rochelle. I take a year off after high school, go back to Australia, live with my brother who's an atheist.
Okay, I think that will do for now. So take care.